They gave him a broken woman as a joke, a cruel trade meant to humiliate them both. The mountain trapper stood silent in the town square, surrounded by mocking faces, while the limping outcast waited for his inevitable rejection. Everyone expected him to walk away. Instead, he lifted her onto his mule without a single word and rode into the wilderness, leaving their laughter behind. What the townspeople didn't know was that this winter would demand more than muscle and pride, and the woman they called useless would prove to be the only thing standing between survival and death. If you're ready to witness how strength gets redefined in the unforgiving mountains, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The Cruel Bargain. The autumn wind cut through Ridgeton like a serrated blade, carrying with it the scent of coming snow and the sharp bite of winter's warning. The frontier town huddled against the base of the granite peaks, a collection of weathered timber buildings and harder-weathered souls who'd carved out existence from unforgiving land. Here, strength meant everything. Weakness meant death, or worse, becoming invisible. Rowan Hale had been invisible to them for 3 years, and that was exactly how he preferred it. He guided his mule down the rocky trail that morning with the same methodical silence that marked everything he did. The animal's hooves struck stone with rhythmic precision, a steady counterpoint to the wind's howl. Rowan's eyes, the color of winter ice, scanned the terrain with the automatic assessment of a man who understood that inattention killed faster than cold or hunger. At 34, Rowan wore his isolation like armor. His beard was trimmed close, practical rather than wild, and his movements carried the economic grace of someone who wasted neither energy nor words. The mountains had taught him that survival demanded efficiency. Every calorie mattered, every decision carried weight. The town appeared below him as he crested the final ridge, a smudge of civilization against the wilderness, smoke rising from chimneys in thin gray columns. Rowan's jaw tightened. He descended into Ridgeton twice yearly, spring and fall, when he needed supplies and could trade the furs that represented months of solitary work. He spoke only when necessary, purchased only what he required, and left before nightfall. The townspeople found his independence unsettling. In a place where community meant survival, his solitary success felt like judgment. He tied his mule outside Brennan's general store just after dawn. The street was empty except for old Tom Farley sweeping the boardwalk in front of the saloon, his rheumy eyes tracking Rowan's movements with undisguised curiosity. "Hale," Tom called out, his voice cracking with age and whiskey. "Heard you had a rough summer. Bear trouble up Miller's Creek way." Rowan's expression didn't change. "Heard wrong." He pushed through the store's door, the bell announcing his arrival with a cheerful jangle that felt obscene in the morning silence. Marcus Brennan looked up from his ledger, his face arranging itself into the careful neutrality of a merchant who understood that every customer's money spent the same, regardless of whether you liked them. "Hale, your regular order? Plus rope, 50 feet, and lamp oil, 2 gallons. Brennan's eyebrows rose slightly. 2 gallons? That's a lot of light for one man. Maybe I like to read. Maybe you're planning to stay up there all winter." Rowan didn't respond. He moved through the store with practiced efficiency, examining goods with careful attention. His fingers tested the quality of a wool blanket, checked the weight of a cast-iron pot, assessed the sharpness of a skinning knife. Everything had to justify the burden of carrying it up the mountain. Behind him, the bell jangled again. Rowan didn't turn, but he felt the shift in the room's atmosphere. The way Brennan's expression tightened, the sudden tension that suggested the newcomer wasn't welcome. "We're closed to you, Alara." Brennan's voice carried an edge of disgust. "I told you last time, no more credit." "I'm not asking for credit." The voice was quiet, almost apologetic, with an undertone of exhaustion that suggested the speaker had fought this battle too many times. "Mrs. Brennan said she'd pay for mending. I finished the shirts." "My wife's charity isn't unlimited. Those shirts are barely adequate." "They're better than adequate. They're perfect. Look at the stitching." "I don't need to look. You want payment? Come back when Sarah's here. I'm not authorized to dispense her pin money." Rowan turned then, curiosity overcoming his preference for uninvolvement. The woman stood just inside the doorway, a bundle of carefully folded shirts cradled against her chest like armor. She was younger than her voice suggested, maybe 25, maybe younger, though hardship had a way of adding years that calendars didn't count. Her dark hair was pulled back severely from a face that might have been pretty if it hadn't been so gaunt. But what caught Rowan's attention was her stance, weight distributed entirely on her right leg, the left held at an angle that suggested permanent injury. She limped. In Ridgeton, that meant everything. "I can wait outside," Alara said quietly, her eyes dropping to the floor. "I'll come back this afternoon." "Don't bother. Sarah's changed her mind, says she'll do her own mending from now on." Brennan's smile was cruel. "Seems she found moth holes in the last batch you did." "That's a lie." The words came out sharper than Alara clearly intended, and she flinched at her own boldness. "I inspected every piece. There were no moth holes." "You calling my wife a liar?" "I'm calling the situation what it is." The silence that followed was dangerous. Rowan could see Alara's hands trembling around the bundle of shirts, could see her fighting the urge to back down, to apologize, to make herself smaller. He recognized the look. He'd seen it on trapped animals, that moment when prey realizes the predator has it cornered, but refuses to give up without forcing the predator to work for it. "Get out!" Brennan's voice was flat. "And don't come back. We don't need cripples slowing down commerce." Alara's face drained of color, but she didn't leave. Instead, she carefully set the bundle of shirts on the counter. "These are yours, paid for or not. I don't do inferior work, and I won't have anyone claiming I do." She turned, her limp pronounced as she moved toward the door. Rowan noticed the way she kept her spine straight despite the obvious pain, the way her chin stayed level even as her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Pride, he thought. She had nothing else left, but she had pride. "Wait." The word came out before Rowan fully realized he was speaking. 3 pairs of eyes turned to him, Brennan's annoyed, Alara's wary, and Tom Farley's gleeful as the old drunk appeared in the doorway, drawn by the scent of drama like a carry-on bird to death. Rowan moved to the counter, examining the shirts Alara had left. He lifted one, checking the seams with fingers that understood quality. The stitching was exquisite, tight even, stronger than the original construction. These weren't merely repaired, they were improved. "How much?" Rowan asked. Brennan blinked. "What?" "How much were you going to pay her?" "That's not your concern. I'm making it my concern. She did work. Work has value. How much?" $2 for the lot." Brennan's tone suggested he was humoring a madman. Rowan pulled coins from his pocket, counted out $2.50, and set them on the counter. "That's for her work. Now finish my order." He turned to Alara, who was staring at him like he'd sprouted antlers. "You do alterations?" She nodded slowly, suspicion and confusion warring across her features. "I need a coat reinforced, shoulders and elbows. Can you do that?" "Yes." "How much?" 75 cents. Rowan nodded. "Bring it to the saloon in 2 hours. I'll have it ready." He completed his transaction with Brennan in tense silence, loaded his supplies onto the mule, and led the animal toward the saloon. Behind him, he could hear Tom Farley's wheezing laughter and the old man's running commentary to anyone who would listen. "Did you see that? Hale's gone soft. Defending the cripple. Wait till everyone hears about this." By noon, half the town knew. By early afternoon, when Rowan retrieved his repaired coat from Alara at the saloon's back entrance, a plan had already taken shape in the minds of men who confused cruelty with cleverness. The saloon filled as the sun descended, bringing with it the loggers, miners, and ranch hands who made up Ridgeton's male population. They were hard men doing hard work, and they found their entertainment where they could. Tonight, apparently, the entertainment would be Rowan Hale. Rowan sat alone at his usual table in the corner, nursing a single whiskey that would last him the evening. He'd learned long ago that alcohol and mountain winters were incompatible, but one drink before the climb back was ritual. The coat lay folded beside him. Alara had done exceptional work, reinforcing the stress points with a technique he'd never seen before, some kind of overlapping stitch pattern that distributed weight more effectively than traditional methods. "Haley!" The voice belonged to Jack Mortimer, the sawmill owner and unofficial leader of Ridgeton's social hierarchy. He was a big man running to fat, with hands scarred from decades of work, and a smile that never reached his eyes. "Heard you had an interesting morning." Rowan didn't respond. He'd learned that silence often discouraged conversation more effectively than words. But Mortimer wasn't discouraged. He pulled out a chair, uninvited, and sat down heavily, followed by three of his cronies, Dutch Hansen, Peter Cobb, and Samuel Worth. They arranged themselves around the table like judges at a tribunal. Tom Farley tells us you've taken an interest in Alara Voss, Mortimer continued, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet saloon. Other conversations died as men turned to watch. That true? I paid for work done. That's not interest. That's transaction. But you defended her, spoke up for her. That's unusual behavior for a man who usually can't spare 3 words for anyone. Rowan met Mortimer's eyes. She did quality work. Brennan was cheating her. I don't like thieves. Thieves? Mortimer laughed, slapping the table. You hear that, boys? Marcus Brennan's a thief because he won't pay full price for a cripple's sewing. The work was worth full price. Maybe, maybe not. But see, that's interesting, Hale, because it got us thinking. You've been up on that mountain alone for 3 years now. That's a long time for a man to go without companionship. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Rowan's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened slightly around his glass. We're not interested in your thoughts on my personal life. But we are. See, we're concerned citizens, and we know how brutal mountain winters can be. A man alone up there? That's dangerous. You need someone to help. Someone to keep the home fires burning while you're running trap lines. Mortimer leaned forward, his smile widening. You need a wife. The saloon had gone completely silent now. Even the bartender had stopped polishing glasses, his attention fixed on the drama unfolding in the corner. I don't need anything from this town. But that's where you're wrong, Hale. Because we've got something you might actually want. Something nobody else wants, actually, which makes it perfect. Mortimer gestured broadly to his companions. We're prepared to make you an offer, a trade, if you will. Not interested. You haven't heard the offer yet. Don't need to. We'll give you Alara Voss. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Rowan didn't move, didn't speak, but something shifted in his eyes. A flash of anger quickly suppressed. She's not a commodity to be traded. Isn't she, though? Mortimer's voice took on a philosophical tone, like he was discussing the weather rather than a human being. She's got no family, no prospects, no husband, and she never will, not with that leg. She can barely take care of herself. She's been surviving on charity and pity work for 2 years, taking up space, consuming resources. She's useless to this town, Hale. Completely useless. But, Dutch Hansen interjected, his pig-like eyes gleaming, she can sew. You saw that yourself. And she can cook. At least, she used to cook for the Brennans before Sarah got tired of her. She might be able to handle cabin work, light chores. She'd be better than nothing up there in the mountains. Marginally better, Peter Cobb added with a cruel laugh, assuming she doesn't freeze to death the first week. Rowan stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. This conversation is over. Wait! Mortimer held up his hands in mock placation. Hear us out. We're making a genuine offer here. You need help. She needs a purpose. We'll even sweeten the deal. If you take her off our hands, we'll throw in an extra month's worth of supplies. Salt, flour, beans, whatever you need. Consider it a wedding present. You can't trade a person. We're not trading her. We're facilitating an arrangement. She's free to say no, of course. Mortimer's smile became predatory. But where else is she going to go? What else is she going to do? At least with you, she'd have a roof over her head, food, protection. That's more than she has now. The other men around the table nodded in agreement, their faces showing the self-satisfied expressions of people who believed they were solving a problem rather than creating one. And if I refuse, then she stays here, continuing to be a burden until she starves or the cold takes her. Either way, problem solved. Mortimer stood, brushing imaginary dust from his jacket. But you strike me as a practical man, Hale. You wouldn't have survived 3 years alone if you weren't. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to bring Alara out here, present the offer in front of everyone, and you're going to make a choice. Say yes, and you get help for the winter plus supplies. Say no, and, well, everyone will understand why a man like you doesn't need anybody. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. If Rowan refused, he'd be rejecting not just the offer, but a human being in front of the entire town, reinforcing his isolation, proving he was as cold as they suspected. If he accepted, he'd be playing along with their cruel game, validating their treatment of Alara as property. And if he simply left, walking away from the situation entirely, Alara would bear the brunt of the town's mockery and resentment for causing a scene. "Bring her out," Rowan said quietly. Mortimer's smile broadened. "Excellent. Samuel, go fetch Miss Voss. Tell her the town council needs to speak with her." Worth hurried off, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. The remaining men settled back into their chairs, and the saloon slowly came back to life around them. Conversations resuming, drinks being poured, though everyone remained alert to the drama playing out in the corner. Rowan sat back down, his face carefully neutral. Inside, his mind worked through scenarios, calculating angles and outcomes. He'd walked into an ambush, his earlier defense of Alara having been noted and weaponized. These men weren't trying to help anyone. They were entertaining themselves at the expense of the weak, and they'd drawn him into it because his independence irritated them. The mountain had taught Rowan many lessons about predators. The most important was this: when cornered, predators became most dangerous. But sometimes the best defense wasn't fighting. It was making the predator think they'd won while you planned your escape. 10 minutes passed before Worth returned, Alara limping beside him. She looked terrified, her face pale, her eyes darting around the crowded saloon like a trapped rabbit. Women didn't come into the saloon unless they were serving drinks or selling something else entirely, and everyone knew Alara was neither. "Miss Voss!" Mortimer's voice boomed with false joviality. "Thank you for joining us. Please have a seat." Alara remained standing, her weight on her good leg, her hands clasped in front of her like a shield. "Mr. Worth said the council needed to speak with me. About what?" "About your future, your prospects, your situation." Mortimer gestured expansively. "We've been discussing what's best for you, and we think we've found a solution that benefits everyone." "I don't understand." "It's simple. You need security. Mr. Hale here needs assistance. We're proposing a marriage." The color that had drained from Alara's face earlier fled completely now, leaving her looking like a ghost. "What?" "A marriage, a partnership. You'd go up to his cabin, help with domestic duties, and in exchange you'd have food, shelter, protection. It's a fair arrangement." Alara's eyes found Rowan's across the table. He saw confusion there, and fear, and something else. A desperate, humiliated hope that this might somehow be real, that someone might actually want her, rather than just tolerating her existence. "Did you?" she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you ask for this?" "No," Rowan said flatly. The hope in her eyes died. She looked away, blinking rapidly. "Well, no, technically Hale didn't ask," Mortimer interjected smoothly. "But when we suggested it, he didn't say no either. Isn't that right, Hale?" Rowan didn't answer. He was watching Alara, seeing the way her spine stiffened, the way her chin came up despite the tears threatening to spill. She was preparing for rejection, armoring herself against the blow she knew was coming. "Mr. Hale doesn't want a wife," Alara said, her voice steadier now. "Especially not one who can barely walk. This is humiliating. Please let me leave." Now, don't be hasty." Mortimer held up his hand. "Hale, why don't you tell the young lady yourself? Do you want help this winter or not?" Every eye in the saloon was on him now. Rowan could feel the weight of their expectation, the cruel anticipation of men who wanted to see him squirm, wanted to see both him and Alara brought low for their entertainment. He thought about his cabin, dark and cold and silent. He thought about the long winter ahead, the isolation that he'd convinced himself was strength, but might just be cowardice. He thought about the way Alara had stood up to Brennan that morning, refusing to apologize for quality work. He thought about the reinforced stitching on his coat, the intelligence evident in the technique. And he thought about the simple fact that these men, these predators, expected him to play their game. Rowan stood slowly. He pulled his coin purse from his pocket and counted out money. More money than most people in Ridgeton saw in a month. He set it on the table in neat stacks. "That's for winter supplies," he said. "Full inventory, plus pack horse rental, plus wages." Mortimer's smile faltered slightly. "Wages? What wages?" "Hers." Rowan nodded toward Alara. She's not a wife, she's an employee. She works, she gets paid. Standard rate for household labor, room and board included. The saloon erupted in murmurs. This wasn't the script they'd expected. Mortimer's face reddened. Now wait just a minute. You said I needed help. I'm hiring help. That's legal. That's legitimate. Any objections? This isn't what we... Any objections? Rowan's voice cut through the noise like a blade. The saloon went quiet again. Mortimer's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment. He'd been outmaneuvered, and everyone could see it. If he objected now, he'd be admitting the whole thing was a setup, a cruel joke. If he accepted, Rowan was taking control of the situation, transforming their mockery into legitimate business. No objections, Mortimer finally ground out. Rowan turned to Alara. I need someone to manage the cabin. Cook, clean, mend, organize supplies. It's hard work. It's isolated. Winter is brutal. But it's honest work, and you'll be paid fair wages. You interested? Alara stared at him, her mouth slightly open, clearly struggling to process what had just happened. I don't... Simple question. You want the job or not? Why? The word came out strangled. Why would you do this? Because you do quality work. I saw your stitching. I need quality work up there, not someone who'll coast by. You seem like you don't coast. Something flickered in Alara's eyes. Not hope exactly, but perhaps the memory of what hope felt like. If I say yes, it's just a job? Just work? Just work. And if I can't keep up, if my leg makes it too hard, then we figure it out, or you leave. Your choice either way. Alara looked around the saloon, at the faces watching her, waiting for her decision. Rowan could see her calculating, weighing the known humiliation of staying in Ridgeton against the unknown dangers of leaving with a stranger. Neither option was good, but one option offered dignity. I'll take the job, she said quietly. Good. We leave at dawn. Pack light. Only essentials. Everything else I'll provide. Rowan collected his money from the table, leaving only what he owed for his drink. Meet me at the east gate when the sun rises. He didn't wait for a response. He picked up his repaired coat, nodded once to Alara, and walked out of the saloon into the evening air. Behind him, he could hear the explosion of conversation, the anger and confusion and laughter of men whose entertainment had been ruined. Let them talk. He'd be gone by morning. Rowan spent the night in the livery stable with his mule, preferring the company of animals to another encounter with Ridgeton citizens. He worked through his supplies, double-checking everything, calculating weights and distances. Taking on another person changed the mathematics of survival. He'd need more food, more fuel, more of everything. The risk calculation had shifted, but risk could be managed, and the alternative, leaving Alara to the mercy of a town that had none, sat in his gut like spoiled meat. He told himself it was practical. She could sew, she could cook, she could handle detail work that his large hands struggled with. She'd earn her keep. This was business. But part of him, the part he tried to ignore, remembered the look in her eyes when Brennan had called her a cripple. The way she'd refused to apologize for work she knew was excellent. The dignity she'd maintained even when the entire town conspired to strip it away. She had something he recognized, the refusal to break. Dawn came cold and clear, the sky bleeding red over the eastern peaks. Rowan loaded the last of his supplies and led his mule toward the east gate. He half expected Alara not to show, expected her to have reconsidered in the night, to have realized that staying in familiar misery was safer than trusting an unknown man with unknown intentions. But she was there. She stood beside the gate, wrapped in a thin wool coat that had seen better years, carrying a single canvas bag that likely held everything she owned. Her face was composed but pale, and she kept her weight on her good leg. In the early light, Rowan could see the permanent damage more clearly. The left leg was slightly shorter than the right, twisted at an angle that suggested a break that had healed badly or not at all. "You came," she said as he approached. "Said I would. I wasn't sure you meant it. I thought maybe when you sobered up. I don't make promises drunk. I don't get drunk." Rowan gestured to the mule. "Can you ride?" Alara looked at the animal uncertainly. "Not well. Not with my leg." "You'll learn. Better than walking 14 miles. He approached her, moving slowly, and held out his hands. I'm going to lift you. Don't fight it. She flinched instinctively but nodded. Rowan gripped her waist. She was lighter than he expected, all bone and determination, and lifted her easily onto the mule's back. She gasped, gripping the saddle horn with white knuckles. Sit deep. Don't lean forward. Mule's steady but stubborn. If she stops, don't kick. Just wait. What if she doesn't start again? Then you wait until she does. Mule's smarter than most people. She'll move when she's ready. Rowan took the lead rope and started walking. Behind them, Ridgeton was waking up, smoke rising from chimneys, voices calling out morning greetings, the sounds of a community coming to life. Neither of them looked back. They walked in silence for the first hour, following the trail that wound up into the foothills. The air grew thinner and colder as they climbed, and Rowan could hear Alara's breathing becoming labored. She wasn't complaining, though, wasn't asking to stop or rest, just enduring. Tell me about your leg, Rowan said finally. What about it? How it happened, what you can do, what you can't. Alara was quiet for so long that Rowan thought she might not answer. Then, wagon accident 3 years ago. My parents and I were coming to Ridgeton from the eastern settlements. The wagon lost a wheel coming down a steep grade. It rolled, they died. I didn't, but my leg was crushed under the wagon tongue. Anyone said it? A traveling doctor, but he was drunk, and I was screaming, and it healed wrong. Can't run, can't stand for long periods, can't carry heavy loads, can't do most things people consider useful in a frontier town. Can you shoot? What? A rifle. Can you shoot one? I don't know. I've never tried. I'll teach you, first week. Rowan adjusted the supply pack on his shoulder. Can you preserve meat, salt, smoke, cure? I've watched it done. Watching's not doing, but you can learn. What about tanning, processing furs? No. I'll teach you that too. Rowan glanced back at her. Here's how this works. I don't care what you can't do. I care what you're willing to learn. Mountain doesn't care about your leg, only cares about competence. You willing to become competent? Alara's expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or something like it. You really mean that, about teaching me? Why wouldn't I? Because most people they see the leg and they decide I'm not worth the effort, not worth investing in. Most people are idiots. A sound escaped Alara, something between a laugh and a sob. She quickly suppressed it, but Rowan had heard it. He didn't comment, just kept walking. The trail grew steeper. The mule's hooves struck rock with increasing frequency as soil gave way to stone. Rowan maintained a steady pace, not fast but not slow, the rhythm of someone who understood that mountain travel was about endurance, not speed. Why did you do it? Alara asked as they crested a ridge. Last night, why did you turn their joke into this? Rowan considered the question. Told you already, you do quality work. That's not a real answer. It's the answer you get? No. Alara's voice strengthened. I'm risking my life going into the mountains with a stranger. I'm entitled to a real answer. Why? Rowan stopped walking. He turned to face her fully, his ice-blue eyes meeting hers with uncomfortable directness. Because I know what it's like to be discarded, he said quietly. I know what it's like when people decide you don't fit, so you must be broken. And I know that the people who decide that are usually wrong. He paused. And because nobody should be treated like property, not even as a joke. The honesty of it hung between them like a bridge. Alara's expression softened, some of the defensive tension leaving her shoulders. Thank you, she whispered. Rowan nodded once and resumed walking. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've survived your first mountain winter, then decide if gratitude's appropriate. They climbed higher. The sun tracked across the sky, and the temperature dropped. Rowan watched Alara carefully, noting when her breathing became too labored, when her grip on the saddle horn tightened from pain rather than nervousness. He called rest stops without explanation, letting her believe he needed the breaks when really he was managing her endurance. By late afternoon, the cabin came into view. It sat in a natural clearing, backed against a cliff face that protected it from the worst winds. The structure was solid, thick log walls chinked with mud and moss, a steep pitched roof to shed snow, a stone chimney rising from one side. A small barn stood nearby, and behind that, a root cellar built into the hillside. The clearing was carefully positioned, high enough for safety, low enough for accessible water, with clear sight lines in 3 directions. "This is it," Rowan said. Alara stared at the cabin with an expression he couldn't read. "It's isolated." "That's the point. The nearest neighbors? 10 miles, maybe more. Don't know. Don't care. And if something happens, if there's an emergency, then we handle it ourselves. That's mountain life. Nobody's coming to help. Nobody's close enough to hear you scream." Rowan looked at her seriously. "Last chance. You want to turn back? Now's the time. Once winter comes, we're locked in until spring. No changing your mind. No rescue. Just you, me, and whatever competence we can manage between us." Alara looked at the cabin, then back toward the trail they'd climbed, then at Rowan, her jaw set with determination. "I've been screaming in Ridgeton for 2 years, and nobody heard me there either. At least here, I'll be screaming for a reason." Despite himself, Rowan almost smiled. "All right then, let's get you inside." He lifted her down from the mule with the same efficient care he'd used to lift her up. She stumbled slightly when her feet hit the ground, her bad leg buckling, but she caught herself on the mule's saddle and straightened. "I can walk." "Didn't say you couldn't." Rowan led her to the cabin door and pushed it open. The interior was exactly what it appeared to be: functional, sparse, organized with military precision. A single room served multiple purposes: sleeping area in one corner, cooking area in another, work table in the center, shelves along one wall stocked with supplies. A large fireplace dominated the far wall, and above it, racks held dried meat and herbs. Everything was clean. Everything had its place. But there was no warmth to it, no personality. It was shelter, not home. "This is where you'll sleep." Rowan pointed to a second, smaller sleeping area he'd clearly prepared that morning, a simple pallet of furs in the corner farthest from his own bed. "Privacy's limited, but we'll make do. Cooking supplies are here, water barrel here, wash basin here. Chamber pots under the bed. Empty it daily in the designated area behind the barn. I'll show you. Never empty it upslope of the water source. Understand?" Alara nodded, her eyes taking in everything. "Work starts tomorrow. Today, you rest and learn the layout. I'll handle the evening chores." Rowan moved toward the door, then paused. "One rule: honesty. You're hurt. You say so. You're scared. You say so. You think something's dangerous or stupid. You say so. Pride kills people in the mountains faster than cold or hunger. Understood?" "Understood." "Good." Rowan stepped outside, then looked back once more. "Welcome to my mountain, Alara Voss. Try not to die on it." The door closed behind him, leaving Alara alone in the cabin that would be her home, or her prison, for the next 6 months. She sank onto the pallet of furs, her bad leg throbbing from the day's travel. Around her the cabin creaked and settled, making sounds she didn't recognize. Outside she could hear Rowan moving around, tending to the animals, doing whatever mysterious tasks mountain life required. For the first time in 2 years, Alara was away from Ridgeton. Away from the mockery and the pity, and the constant weight of being seen as broken. But she'd traded one isolation for another. And this new isolation came with snow and cold, and a stranger who'd hired her for reasons he wouldn't fully explain. Alara pulled her thin coat tighter around herself and wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Outside, the sun began its descent behind the peaks, and the temperature dropped another 5 degrees. Winter was coming, and neither of them was ready for what it would demand. The first snow came 3 days after Alara arrived, and with it came the first real test of whether she would survive or become another cautionary tale whispered around Ridgeton's fires. She woke to the sound of Rowan moving through the cabin in the pre-dawn darkness, his movements precise and quiet. He'd been up for hours already. She could tell from the warmth of the fire and the smell of coffee brewing. Her breath misted in the air as she sat up, every muscle in her body screaming protest. The journey up the mountain had been brutal, but the 2 days since had been worse. Rowan had meant what he said about work starting immediately. "Morning," he said without looking at her, his attention focused on the map spread across the work table. "Storm's coming. Big one. We've got maybe 6 hours to secure everything before it hits." Alara pushed herself to standing, biting back a gasp as her bad leg took her weight. She'd learned quickly not to show weakness, not because Rowan mocked her for it, but because he immediately compensated for it, and she needed to prove she could pull her own weight. "What do you need me to do?" "Everything on this list." He slid a piece of paper toward her. His handwriting was surprisingly neat, each task written in clear block letters. "Prioritize top to bottom. Don't skip steps. Don't improvise. Questions?" Alara scanned the list. "Secure shutters. Check water barrels. Move firewood closer to cabin. Organize medical supplies." Each task had detailed instructions written in the margins. "The firewood. How much?" "Enough for 3 days. Stack it on the south side where it stays driest. Use the leather tarp to cover it." "And if I can't finish before the storm?" "Then you work faster." Rowan finally looked at her, his ice-blue eyes assessing. "Or you decide what's truly essential and focus there. Survival's about prioritization. You'll learn or you'll freeze." He grabbed his rifle from above the door and shrugged into his coat, the one she'd repaired, she noticed. "I'm checking the trap line. Back before the storm hits. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone." "Who would come all the way up here?" "Mountain lions, bears coming down for winter. Desperate men who got lost and see smoke from the chimney." He paused at the door. "Most dangerous thing in these mountains isn't the weather. It's underestimating what people, or animals, will do when they're hungry enough." The door closed behind him, and Alara heard the crunch of his boots in the frost as he walked away. She stood alone in the cabin, the list heavy in her hand, and felt the full weight of isolation settle over her like a shroud. But she'd been alone before. Alone in a crowd was worse than alone in the wilderness. At least here, the mountain didn't pretend to care while secretly hoping she'd disappear. She set to work. The shutters fought her. Each one was heavy oak reinforced with iron, designed to withstand hurricane-force winds and protect the precious glass windows Rowan had somehow hauled up the mountain. Her hands weren't strong enough to lift them easily, and her bad leg made balancing while reaching overhead nearly impossible. She failed the first attempt. The shutter slipped from her grip and crashed against the cabin wall, the sound echoing across the clearing like a gunshot. Alara stood there breathing hard, her hands shaking from exertion and frustration. "Think," she muttered to herself. "Don't just copy what he'd do. Find your own way." She studied the problem. The shutters hung on hinges and needed to be swung closed and latched. Rowan could simply muscle them into place. She couldn't. But she didn't need muscle if she had leverage. Alara found a length of rope in the barn and threaded it through the shutter's handle. She wrapped the other end around a post, creating a pulley system. It took 3 tries to get the angle right, but eventually she could pull the shutter closed using her body weight rather than arm strength. Once closed, latching it was simple. 1 down, 5 to go. By the time she finished all the shutters, 2 hours had passed and the wind had picked up. Dark clouds massed over the peaks to the north, moving faster than anything she'd seen in the lowlands. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees and her breath came in white clouds that dissipated immediately in the increasing wind. Water barrels next. She checked each one as Rowan had instructed, making sure they were full and covered. The main barrel inside the cabin was fine, but the backup barrel in the barn had frozen overnight, a thin sheet of ice across the top. "Don't skip steps," she repeated Rowan's words. The instructions said to break the ice and refill if needed. She found a wooden mallet and carefully cracked the ice, then hauled bucket after bucket from the well to top off the barrel. Her bad leg protested every trip, but she ignored it. Pain was just information. It would hurt whether she worked or not. The firewood nearly broke her. The main woodpile was 30 yards from the cabin, close enough for easy access in good weather, far enough to reduce fire risk. But with a storm coming, Rowan wanted 3 days' worth moved to the south side of the cabin. 3 days' worth meant at least 40 trips. Alara stared at the pile and did the math. With her leg, she could carry maybe 2 split logs at a time. 40 trips. Maybe more. And the wind was getting worse, snow already starting to spit from the darkening sky. "I can't do this," she said aloud. Then more firmly, "I can't do this his way." She limped to the barn and found what she needed, an old wooden sled Rowan probably used for hauling supplies in winter. It had rope handles and wooden runners. She dragged it to the woodpile, loaded it with as much wood as she could pile on, and began pulling. The sled moved. slowly, fighting her every step, leaving deep furrows in the frost-hardened ground. But it moved. One trip with the sled carried as much as 10 trips by hand. She made 6 trips before her hands started bleeding. The rope had worn through the skin on her palms despite her attempts to wrap them. She kept going. 7 trips, 8. The snow was falling harder now, fat flakes that stuck to her hair and coat. 9 trips. Her bad leg was screaming, threatening to give out completely. 10 trips. That's enough. Rowan's voice made her jump. He'd appeared silently from the tree line, his rifle slung over his shoulder, 3 rabbits hanging from his belt. His face was unreadable as he surveyed the firewood she'd stacked. Probably 2 days' worth, not 3. I couldn't finish, Alara said, hating how defensive she sounded. I tried, but you did fine, she blinked. What? 2 days is enough. 3 was ideal, but 2's workable. He moved past her to inspect the stack, checking that she'd arranged it properly to shed water. Smart thinking with the sled. Didn't occur to me you'd need it. I cheated. You said carry it. I said move it. How you move it is your business. He glanced at her hands, noticing the blood. Inside. Now. We treat those before infection sets in. The cabin felt warm after hours in the increasing cold. Rowan directed her to sit at the work table while he retrieved his medical supplies. A wooden box surprisingly well stocked with bandages, salves, and mysterious bottles labeled in his neat handwriting. Hands, he ordered. Alara extended her palms. The skin was raw and torn, rope burns crisscrossing the existing calluses from years of sewing. Rowan examined them with the same clinical assessment he'd given everything else, his large fingers surprisingly gentle as he turned her hands to see the damage in better light. This'll hurt, he warned, and applied something that burned like liquid fire. Alara gasped, but didn't pull away. He worked quickly, cleaning each wound, applying salve, then wrapping her hands in clean cotton bandages. You're good at that, she managed. Practice. Mountain doesn't care if you're careful. It'll hurt you anyway. He finished the second hand and began packing away supplies. You did well today. I didn't finish the list. You prioritized correctly. Shutters were essential. Done. Water was essential. Done. Firewood was essential. Mostly done. Medical supplies could wait until we were inside. He nodded toward the window, where snow now fell in sheets, visibility already reduced to a few yards. Storm's here. We're locked in for at least 2 days, maybe 3. The reality of that settled over Alara like a weight. 2 days? Maybe 3. In this cabin, with this stranger. No escape, no privacy. Nothing but whatever existed between them and whatever the storm demanded. I need you to understand something, Rowan said, his voice taking on a tone she hadn't heard before. Something almost gentle. You're going to fail up here. A lot. I fail. Everyone fails. Mountain's too big, too unpredictable. What matters isn't whether you fail, it's whether you quit. I don't quit. I know, I saw that in Ridgeton. Saw it in how you stood up to Brennan. Saw it today with the firewood. He moved to the fireplace, adding logs with practiced efficiency. But knowing you don't quit and proving it through a mountain winter are different things. So I'm telling you now, there will be days when quitting seems like the smart choice. When staying warm in bed feels better than facing whatever frozen hell is waiting outside. That's when it matters. Alara watched him work. This strange man who'd hired her for reasons she still didn't fully understand. Why are you really up here, Rowan? Why leave everything behind? His hands stilled on the logs. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because down there people expected me to be something I wasn't. Expected me to fit into a shape that didn't match what I am. Up here, the mountain doesn't care what I am, only cares what I can do. What did they expect you to be? Doesn't matter now. He straightened, brushing bark from his hands. Point is, mountain's honest. It'll kill you, but it won't lie to you first. Can't say that about most people. The storm hit in full force as darkness fell. Wind screamed around the cabin, driving snow against the shuttered windows with sounds like thrown sand. The walls creaked and groaned, and Alara found herself flinching at every new noise, certain the structure would collapse. Rowan seemed unbothered. He prepared dinner with the same methodical efficiency he brought to everything. Rabbit stew with dried vegetables and herbs, thick and rich and better than anything Alara had eaten in months. They ate in silence, the storm's fury providing conversation enough. "Tell me about the sewing," Rowan said eventually, breaking the quiet. "Where'd you learn?" "My mother. She was a seamstress in the eastern settlements, trained in the old country before immigrating. She taught me everything: how to read fabric, how to make stitches invisible, how to reinforce stress points." Alara stared into her bowl. She said good stitching was like good character, not about being perfect, about being strong where it mattered. She was right. That reinforcement pattern you used on my coat, never seen anything like it. It's called a Dutch interlock. Distributes tension across multiple thread lines instead of concentrating it in one seam. Takes 3 times as long as normal stitching, but it'll outlast the fabric itself. Rowan nodded slowly. That kind of thinking, seeing the problem differently, finding a better solution, that'll serve you up here. Mountain rewards intelligence more than strength. Tell that to my firewood stack. I am. You finished it, didn't you? Maybe not the way I would have, but you finished it. That's intelligence recognizing its own limitations and adapting. He ladled more stew into her bowl without asking. Eat. You burned more calories today than you're used to. Body needs fuel. They settled into an uneasy coexistence as the storm raged. Rowan worked on his trapline maps, making notes and calculations. Alara attempted to organize the medical supplies he'd asked her to sort, learning the names and uses of each item as she went. He answered her questions without impatience, occasionally adding information she hadn't asked for but clearly needed to know. Willow bark for pain and fever. Chew it or make tea. Tastes like death but works. Honey for wounds. Better than most salves. Keep it sealed tight or it crystallizes. Whiskey's for sterilizing, not drinking. Well, mostly. The hours passed. The storm showed no signs of weakening. Eventually, Alara's exhaustion caught up with her. She stumbled toward her sleeping pallet, barely managing to remove her boots before collapsing onto the furs. She woke sometime in the night to find an additional blanket draped over her, and the fire built up to a roar. Across the cabin, Rowan sat in a chair facing the door, his rifle across his lap, keeping watch over nothing and everything. He didn't sleep, she realized. Or if he did, it was in shifts she never witnessed. He was always alert, always monitoring, always prepared for whatever might come. Alara pulled the blanket tighter and wondered what kind of life taught a man to never fully rest. The storm lasted 3 days, just as Rowan had predicted. By the time it passed, 2 feet of snow blanketed everything, transforming the clearing into an alien landscape of white contours and dangerous beauty. The temperature had dropped below 0, and frost coated the inside of the windows despite the roaring fire. On the 4th morning, Rowan declared it time for Alara's first real lesson. "We're going to the root cellar," he announced. "You need to know where everything is, how much we have, how to ration it." The root cellar was built into the hillside behind the cabin, accessible through a heavy wooden door that took both of them to open against the accumulated snow. Inside, the temperature was cold but stable, and the darkness was absolute until Rowan lit a lantern. The space revealed itself in the flickering light. Shelves lined with jars of preserved vegetables, smoked meats hanging from hooks, barrels of flour, and salt and dried beans. Everything labeled, everything organized, everything sufficient for one person to survive a winter. But not 2. Alara saw Rowan doing the calculations in his head, his expression tightening. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Manageable, if we're careful." He moved through the space, pointing out supplies. "These are already processed and sealed. Touch them only for daily use. These are raw materials that need work, salting, smoking, drying. That's where you come in." "I told you I've never processed meat. And I told you I'd teach you, today, right now." He pulled down a rabbit carcass from one of the hooks. "This is 3 days old, perfect for what we need. Watch carefully." What followed was the most intense education Alara had ever received. Rowan was a demanding but effective teacher, demonstrating each step once, then making her repeat it until she got it right. He showed her how to identify different cuts, how to separate meat from bone with minimal waste, how to prepare brine for preservation, how to recognize spoilage before it spread. "Waste kills people in the winter," he explained. "Not cold, not hunger. Waste. Every piece of meat matters. Every vegetable matters. You throw nothing away until you've exhausted every use for it." "What about bones?" "Boil them for stock. then crush them for fertilizer, then burn them for bone ash, useful for making soap. He handed her the knife. Your turn. Same rabbit. Show me what you learned. Alara's first attempt was clumsy, her hands still sore from the rope burns despite the bandages. She wasted meat, left too much on the bone, and nearly cut herself twice. Rowan watched without comment, letting her struggle. Stop, he finally said. What are you doing wrong? Everything? Specifically. She studied her work, comparing it mentally to what he'd done. I'm trying to go fast like you did. I've been doing this for 15 years. You've been doing it for 15 minutes. Speed's the enemy of learning. Slow down. Precision first. Speed comes later. She started over, this time moving with deliberate care. It took her 3 times as long, but the result was significantly better. Rowan nodded approval. Better. Practice on 5 more rabbits. Tomorrow we'll start on the deer I brought down before you arrived. The work was gruesome, exhausting, and strangely meditative. Alara found a rhythm in it, a focus that blocked out everything except the immediate task. Her hands learned the feel of it, the resistance of cartilage, the clean separation of muscle, the satisfaction of a cut done right. By the end of the day, she'd processed 8 rabbits and felt like she'd lived an entire lifetime. I smell like death, she announced as they returned to the cabin. You smell like work. There's a difference. Rowan pulled out a large pot. We heat water. You wash. I'll prepare dinner. Where do I wash? He gestured to a corner of the cabin where a folding screen provided minimal privacy. Pot of hot water, cloth, soap, be quick. We can't waste heat. The wash was perfunctory but blessed. Alara scrubbed away the blood and smell, trying not to think about how exposed she was, how thin the screen was, how aware she was of Rowan's presence just yards away. But he made no comment, no inappropriate glance, treating her privacy with the same respect he'd treat any boundary. When she emerged, dressed in clean clothes from her meager supply, he'd already finished cooking. They ate together, the silence between them feeling less awkward than it had days before. They were learning each other's rhythms, the way 2 musicians learn to play in sync. Question, Alara said eventually. Why do you live like this? I understand wanting solitude, but this level of preparation, this intensity, it's more than just preference. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then, I was a soldier, long time ago, fought in the territorial wars out west, saw things, did things. He stared into his bowl. When it ended, I couldn't go back to pretending normal life was normal. Couldn't make small talk about weather when I'd watched men die for a flag most of them couldn't read. So I came here, where survival is honest, where the threats are real and immediate, not hidden behind politics and lies. Do you regret it? Some days. Most days, no. He looked at her directly. You understand that, I think. Why you agreed to come here. Not just because the town treated you like garbage, because you were tired of pretending their judgment mattered. Alara felt something shift in her chest, a recognition she hadn't expected. Yes, I'm tired of apologizing for being alive. Then don't. Not up here. Mountain doesn't accept apologies anyway. Only accepts effort. The next week passed in relentless routine. Rowan woke before dawn, checked the weather, planned the day's work. Alara learned to anticipate his needs, to work alongside him rather than waiting for instructions. He taught her constantly how to read animal tracks in snow, how to identify edible bark in emergency, how to construct emergency shelter, how to tell if ice was safe to walk on. She taught him nothing deliberately, but he learned anyway. Learned that she processed information differently than he did, that she needed to understand the why before the how, that she worked better with systematic organization than improvisation. He began explaining his reasoning before giving instructions, and the efficiency of their partnership improved. But tension was building. Alara could feel it in the increasing sharpness of Rowan's corrections, the way his patience seemed to fray when she struggled with physical tasks. He valued strength, endurance, the ability to simply power through obstacles. Her leg made that impossible. She had to find other ways, and sometimes those ways took longer or required resources he considered wasteful. The breaking point came 2 weeks after the first storm. Rowan had asked her to haul water from the well to refill the indoor barrel, a simple task he'd done 100 times. But the ground was icy. Her leg was aching from days of constant work, and on her third trip, she fell. The bucket spilled, soaking her clothes with freezing water, and her bad leg twisted beneath her with an audible crack. She cried out, more from frustration than pain, and sat in the snow fighting tears while cold water seeped into her bones. Rowan appeared from the barn, took in the scene, and his face went hard. "How many times do I have to tell you? You can't carry full buckets. Your leg can't handle the weight on ice." "I was being careful, not careful enough. Look at you. Soaked, freezing, leg probably injured worse now. This is exactly what I was afraid of." He hauled her to her feet with less gentleness than usual. "You're a liability. You can't do basic tasks without hurting yourself." The words hit like a physical blow. Alara felt something inside her go very still and very cold. "Then I'll do better." Better isn't enough. This isn't about effort. It's about capability. Maybe Ridgeton was right. Maybe you are. Don't. Her voice cut through his like a blade. "Don't you dare finish that sentence." Rowan stopped, seeing something in her face that made him take a step back. "I have worked every single day since I arrived," Alara said, her voice shaking with fury. "I have learned everything you've thrown at me. I have kept up despite my leg, despite never doing this work before, despite being exhausted and scared and completely out of my depth. And I have not complained once. I know that. I'm not finished." She stepped toward him, ignoring the pain in her leg. "You want me to be strong like you, to carry heavy loads, to march through snow, to pretend my leg doesn't exist. But I can't. So instead of wasting energy trying to be you, I find other ways. I use the sled. I make multiple trips. I take longer. But I finish. Every time, I finish. It's not sustainable. Neither is your expectation. You want someone who can match you physically? You should have hired a man. You hired me. So either accept that I do things differently or admit this was a mistake, and we end it now." They stood in the snow, breath misting between them, the cabin behind them radiating warmth they were both too angry to appreciate. Rowan's jaw worked. Then, quietly, "You're right." Alara blinked. "What?" "You're right. I've been expecting you to work like I do, and that's not fair, not realistic." He rubbed his face. I'm not good at this. At accommodating, at adjusting. The mountain taught me one way, and I keep trying to force that way onto you." The anger drained from Alara, leaving exhaustion in its place. "I'm not asking you to lower your standards. I'm asking you to let me meet them my own way." "I know. And I'm sorry." He picked up the spilled bucket. "Get inside. Change into dry clothes. I'll handle the water." "Rowan, please. Let me fix this small thing while I figure out how to fix the bigger things." She limped back to the cabin, her wet clothes already starting to freeze. Behind her, she heard Rowan muttering to himself, the tone suggesting he was angry at himself rather than her. Inside, Alara changed quickly, her hands shaking from cold and residual adrenaline. She'd never stood up to anyone like that before, not even Brennan in the store. Something about the mountain, about the isolation, about Rowan's harsh honesty had unlocked something in her. She'd found her voice. The question was whether he'd respect it or resent it. Rowan entered an hour later, having completed all the water hauling himself. He set the full bucket in its place, then moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames. "I need you to understand something," he said without turning. "When I saw you fall, when I saw that water spill, I panicked, because up here mistakes compound. Today, it's a twisted leg and wasted water. Tomorrow it could be frostbite. Next week it could be something that kills you, and I'd be responsible. I'm responsible for myself. Not entirely. Not up here. We're a team now, whether we meant to be or not. Your survival depends on me. Mine depends on you. And I've been so focused on teaching you survival that I forgot you're a person, not a project." He finally turned to face her. "I'm sorry for what I said. For how I said it. You're not a liability. You're figuring this out faster than I did, and I'm taking it out on you because I'm terrified of failing you." The honesty of it stripped away Alara's remaining anger. "I'm terrified too. Terrified of proving everyone right, proving that I am useless, that I can't contribute, that bringing me here was a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake." Rowan's voice was firm. "You've kept up with everything I've thrown at you. You've adapted where I would have just forced it. You've brought organization to this cabin that I never managed in 3 years." He gestured around the space, and Alara realized he was right. Things were more organized now, more efficient, supplies easier to locate because she'd implemented systems he'd never considered. "Then trust me," Alara said. "Trust that I know my limitations. Trust that I'll ask for help when I need it. And trust that when I do something differently than you would, it's not wrong, it's just different." Rowan nodded slowly. "I can do that. I'll try to do that. That's all I'm asking." They stood in the warm cabin, the storm of their argument past, something new settling into the space between them. Not quite friendship, not quite partnership, but a foundation, a beginning. Outside, the wind picked up again, and fresh snow began to fall. Winter was tightening its grip, and the hardest months were still ahead. But for the first time since arriving, Alara felt like she might actually survive them. Not because she'd become what Rowan wanted her to be, but because she'd proven she could be exactly who she was and still be enough. The breakthrough came on a morning when the world had turned to crystal and death. January had arrived with a vengeance that made the earlier storms look gentle. The temperature had plummeted to 20 below zero, and ice coated everything in layers so thick that sunlight refracted through it in patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't so lethal. Rowan had been checking his northern trap line for 3 days straight, extending his range as game grew scarcer and more desperate. Alara had learned to read his moods by now, could see the tension in his shoulders when he returned each evening with fewer catches. The calculations were always there in his eyes. How much food remained, how many weeks until spring, whether they'd miscalculated somewhere in their careful rationing. On the fourth morning, she woke to find him already dressed, his pack heavier than usual. "Extended run," he said tersely. "Northern ridge and the valley beyond. 2 days, maybe 3. There's an elk migration route that should be active. If I can bring one down, we're set for the rest of winter." "That's 12 miles. In this cold." "Closer to 15. I know the risks." He was checking his rifle with mechanical precision, each movement revealing years of practiced routine. "You'll be fine here. Plenty of firewood, plenty of food. Keep the fire going. Don't go outside unless absolutely necessary. If something happens, nothing will happen. If something happens," he continued firmly, "there's a signal fire set up behind the barn. 3 columns of smoke means emergency. Jackson's Ridge station might see it, might send help. Might not. Don't count on rescue." Alara stood, her bad legs stiff from the cold despite the fire. "You're worried." "I'm always worried. It's how I stay alive." But his ice-blue eyes softened slightly. "You've done well, Alara. Better than I expected. Better than I probably deserved, given how I've pushed you. If anything happens to me out there, don't. If anything happens, wait for spring. Don't try to get down the mountain in winter. Stay here. Ration carefully. You've learned enough to survive until the thaw." The finality in his voice sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with temperature. He was saying goodbye. Not expecting to, not planning to, but preparing for the possibility. "Rowan." She moved closer, looking up at him. "Come back." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, at the simple directness of it. "Planning on it." He left as dawn broke, his figure disappearing into the white landscape like a ghost fading into mist. Alara watched from the window until she couldn't see him anymore, then forced herself into the day's routine. Work was survival. Stillness was death. The first day passed without incident. She maintained the fire, organized supplies, worked on reinforcing their winter clothes with the techniques she'd developed. The silence pressed in, but she'd grown accustomed to it. The mountain was never truly quiet. Wind sang through the peaks, ice cracked and settled, snow whispered against the cabin walls. You learned to hear the difference between normal sounds and dangerous ones. The second day brought unease. The wind shifted, coming from the north with a smell that made her nervous, though she couldn't name why. Animals that had been visible near the clearing disappeared. Even the birds went silent. By the third day, when Rowan should have returned, Alara knew something was wrong. She stood at the window as afternoon light began to fail, watching the tree line for movement that didn't come. He'd said 3 days maximum. He'd never missed a deadline before. His survival depended on precision, on keeping his word to himself about timing and distance. Night fell. The temperature dropped further, Alara kept the fire blazing and tried to convince herself that he'd simply found good hunting and decided to process the kill before returning, that he was fine, that her growing panic was irrational. But her instincts screamed otherwise. She barely slept. Every sound brought her to the window, hoping to see his silhouette approaching through the darkness. Dawn came gray and bitter, and the clearing remained empty. Alara stood in the center of the cabin, her mind racing through possibilities. He could be injured, could be lost, though that seemed unlikely. He knew these mountains like other men knew their own hands. Could be dead, frozen in some ravine where she'd never find him. The smart choice was to wait, to stay warm and safe and trust that he'd return or accept that he wouldn't. Going after him was insane. She had no tracking skills, limited outdoor experience, and a leg that made hiking treacherous even in good conditions. In this cold, on unfamiliar terrain, searching for him was effectively suicide. Alara looked down at her bad leg, at the twisted angle that had defined her for 3 years, that had made her useless in Ridgeton's eyes. To hell with smart choices, she muttered. She dressed in layers, every piece of warm clothing they owned, packed supplies with shaking hands, matches, knife, rope, dried meat, water. Strapped on the snowshoes Rowan had made her practice with, found his backup compass and the map he'd marked with his trapline routes. The Northern Ridge. 15 miles. She'd never walked 15 miles in her life, let alone in sub-zero temperatures with a damaged leg. She opened the cabin door to air so cold it felt like knives in her lungs. The first mile was agony. The snowshoes helped distribute her weight, but her bad leg protested every step, the twisted joint grinding in ways that made her gasp. She followed Rowan's trail. His tracks were still visible, though fresh snow was filling them in. She had maybe hours before they disappeared entirely. Keep moving. Don't think about the pain. Don't think about the cold. Don't think about how insane this is. The second mile was worse. Her leg was screaming now, and exhaustion pulled at her like hands trying to drag her down. She'd never pushed her body this hard. Never had to. But she thought of Rowan's words. I don't care what you can't do. I care what you're willing to learn. She was learning that her body could be forced beyond what seemed possible, learning that pain was just information, and you could choose how to respond to it. The third mile nearly broke her. She fell twice, the snowshoes tangling, her leg giving out completely. The second time, she lay in the snow for a full minute, breathing hard, seriously considering staying down. It would be easier. Warmer, even, as the cold numbed everything into peaceful stillness. But Rowan had taught her something else, too. Giving up was a choice, an active decision, and she hadn't survived Ridgeton's cruelty, hadn't climbed this mountain, hadn't fought her way through 2 months of brutal learning just to quit now. She got up. Mile 4, mile 5. The sun climbed higher but provided no warmth. Rowan's tracks led steadily north, purposeful and straight. He'd known where he was going. That was good. That meant she could follow. Mile 6 brought the first real obstacle. The trail descended sharply into a ravine, the slope treacherous with ice. Rowan's tracks went straight down. He'd have had the strength and balance to navigate it easily. She didn't. Alara studied the descent, her mind working through options. Direct route was impossible, but to the left, a fallen tree created a natural bridge across the narrowest point. It would add distance, but it was navigable. She made her way across carefully, each step deliberate, testing weight before committing. The tree held. On the far side, she picked up his trail again. Mile 7, mile 8. Her water was half gone. Her leg was beyond pain now, operating in some numb realm where it simply obeyed because stopping meant death. The cold was seeping deeper, and she knew she had maybe hours before hypothermia became a real risk. Mile 9 brought hope. The tracks were fresher here, less filled with snow. He'd been through recently. Within the last day, maybe less. Mile 10 brought terror. The tracks stopped abruptly at the base of a massive pine tree. The ground around it was disturbed, churned up with signs of struggle. And there, partially visible under fresh snowfall, was Rowan's pack. No body, no blood. But something had happened here. Rowan! Her voice cracked across the silence, swallowed immediately by the vast indifference of the landscape. Rowan! Nothing. She searched frantically, circling the area, reading the signs. His pack was here, but not his rifle. That meant he was armed. The tree had a massive branch hanging at an awkward angle, cracked but not completely severed. Something heavy had struck it, or been struck by it. Then she saw it. A single track leading away from the tree, irregular and dragging. One of Rowan's boots, but the gait was wrong. He was hurt. The trail led west, away from the cabin, toward rougher terrain. He was heading for the valley. Why? Then she understood. The trapper's shelter. Rowan had mentioned it once, an emergency structure maintained by the few mountain men who worked this range. If he was injured, he'd head for the nearest shelter. Another 2 miles. At least. Alara wanted to cry, wanted to scream, wanted to collapse and let the mountain take her. Her body had nothing left to give. But Rowan was alive and hurt and alone, and she was the only person in 50 miles who knew it. She followed the dragging track west. Mile 11 felt like 100. Every step was a negotiation with her body, a promise of rest that she never kept. The cold was inside her now, making her thoughts sluggish, her movements clumsy. She fell 3 times in quick succession, each time taking longer to get up. The sun was descending. She had maybe 2 hours of usable light left. If she didn't find him before dark, they'd both die out here. Mile 12. The track was clearer now. He'd been moving slower, more erratic. There was blood in the snow. Not much, but enough to tell her he was bleeding from somewhere. "Rowan!" She was shouting constantly now, between gasping breaths. "Rowan! Where are you?" The shelter appeared like a mirage through the trees. A small log structure built against a rock face, barely more than a lean-to but enough to break the wind. Smoke was trickling from a gap in the roof. He was alive. Alara half ran, half fell toward the shelter, her leg finally giving out completely at the entrance. She crawled the last few feet and pushed through the door. Rowan was inside, propped against the far wall, his left leg trapped under a massive log that must have weighed 300 pounds. His face was gray with pain and cold, his rifle lying uselessly beside him. A small fire flickered in a pit he'd somehow managed to build, but it was dying, and he clearly didn't have the strength to maintain it. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Alara? No, you shouldn't. How did you—" "Shut up." She collapsed beside him, her hands already moving to assess the situation. "Tell me what happened. Branch broke? Fell on me? Legs trapped? Been here since yesterday. Can't move it? Can't reach the tools?" His words came in short bursts, pain making speech difficult. "You need to go back. Can't help me. Need to save yourself." I said, "Shut up." She was examining the log, her mind already working through the problem. It was massive, positioned at an angle that pinned his leg against the ground. The wood was solid, no rot, no weak points, pure weight. She couldn't lift it. No one her size could lift it. But she didn't need to lift it. She needed to move it. "Listen to me." Rowan's voice was weaker now. "Hypothermia is setting in. For both of us. You came all this way. That was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid, but now you need to go. Get back to the cabin." "I'll be fine here. You'll be dead by morning, and you know it." Alara was already moving, dragging herself outside to search the area. Her mind was racing, calculating angles and forces. Rowan solved problems with strength. She solved them differently. She found what she needed: a length of fallen branch, solid and straight. Another shorter piece. Rocks of various sizes. She dragged everything inside, her body operating on pure willpower now, adrenaline overriding exhaustion. "What are you doing?" Rowan watched her with confusion and growing alarm. "Leverage, you taught me, remember? Don't have the strength, find another way." She was positioning the long branch under the log, using a rock as a fulcrum point. "When I press down, this end lifts that end. Basic physics. That branch will break. Maybe. Maybe not. Either way, I'm trying." She met his eyes. "You came down from your mountain and chose me when everyone else threw me away? You think I'm leaving you to die alone in this shelter? Not happening." She put her weight on the lever. The branch bowed, creaked, but held. The log shifted slightly. Not enough. "Need more leverage." She adjusted the fulcrum, moving the rock closer to the log. Again. This time the log lifted an inch. Rowan gasped but couldn't pull his leg free. The angle was wrong. Alara's mind raced. She needed to lift it higher, but she also needed to pull him clear simultaneously. Two actions, one person. Impossible. Unless. She found rope in Rowan's pack, tied one end to his belt, threaded it through a crack in the rock wall, and ran it back to herself. Then she repositioned the lever. When I lift, I'm going to pull the rope. It's going to hurt like hell, but your leg should slide free. Ready? Alara, this won't work. Ready? He stared at her, this woman who'd limped into his life, barely able to climb stairs, now orchestrating a rescue that required more courage than he'd seen in most soldiers. Ready. She pressed down with everything she had. The branch groaned, the log lifted, and she simultaneously hauled on the rope with her other hand. The leverage was wrong. Her position was wrong. Everything was wrong. But physics didn't care about wrong. It cared about force and angles and stubborn refusal to accept failure. The log lifted 3 inches. Rowan screamed and pushed with his good leg, and then suddenly he was sliding free, his trapped leg emerging bloody and twisted, but free. The branch snapped. The log crashed back down. Alara collapsed beside Rowan, both of them gasping, the small fire casting their shadows against the walls like primitive paintings of survival. "You did it," Rowan breathed. "You actually did it. How did you?" "Told you. Different way." She was already examining his leg, her hand surprisingly steady. The ankle was badly damaged, possibly broken, definitely sprained. Blood seeped from lacerations where the log had pressed flesh against bone. "This is bad." "I know. Can you walk?" "Not a chance." Alara looked at him, at his size, easily twice her weight, and at the distance back to the cabin. 12 miles. With night falling and temperature dropping and her own body already pushed beyond its limits. "Then I'll drag you." "That's insane. Everything about this is insane." She was laughing now, a slightly hysterical edge to it. "I just walked 12 miles on a leg that's not supposed to work to find a man who lives alone because he trusts mountains more than people. I freed you using a stick and a rock and pure stubbornness. Sanity is not the metric we're using anymore." She built up the fire using the last of the shelter's wood supply, then set about constructing a sled from what she could find. The shelter had old planks, probably left by previous users. She lashed them together with rope, creating a crude travois. It wouldn't be comfortable, but it would distribute Rowan's weight across the snow. "We can't travel at night," Rowan said, his voice taking on the tone of someone trying to reason with someone who'd lost their mind. "It's suicide. We wait for dawn." "And freeze to death before morning? Look at your lips. Look at your hands. You're hypothermic." "I'm hypothermic. The only way we survive is moving, generating heat, getting back to the cabin where we have food and shelter and medical supplies." She finished tying off the sled. "So you have 2 choices. Ride on this sled and let me try to get us home, or stay here and definitely die." "You can't pull me 12 miles. Watch me." She helped him onto the sled. It took both of them working together, and his screams when his leg moved nearly broke her heart. But she got him positioned, wrapped in every piece of cloth and fur they had. Then she took the rope handles and began to pull. The sled moved, slowly, painfully, with a grinding resistance that suggested the snow was conspiring with the mountain to stop them. But it moved. "Alara," Rowan's voice was strained. "Stop. This is impossible." "Probably. You're going to kill yourself trying this." "Maybe." "Why? Why risk everything for me?" She stopped, turned to look at him. In the dying light, his face was gray and drawn, but his eyes were clear and genuinely confused, like he couldn't comprehend why someone would choose this. "Because you're the first person who ever saw me as something other than broken," she said simply. "Because you gave me a chance when no one else would. Because despite being a stubborn, demanding, impossible man, you're decent. And decent is rare enough that it's worth saving." She turned back and pulled. The journey back was a blur of pain and determination and the kind of exhaustion that transcended physical sensation. Alara entered a state where her body simply moved, where thought became unnecessary, where existence narrowed to the next step and the next pull and the rhythm of her breathing. She fell constantly. Each time she got back up, the sled caught on obstacles, rocks, fallen branches, changes in terrain. Each time she problem-solved, finding ways around or through or over. Rowan drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes giving directions in a slurred voice, sometimes silent, She talked to him constantly, afraid that if he stopped responding, he'd slip away entirely. Stay with me. Tell me about your first winter up here. Tell me why you chose this mountain specifically. Tell me anything. Just keep talking. His voice would emerge from the darkness, stories fragmenting into observations, into silence, into stories again. She learned things she'd never known, that he'd been engaged once, before the war, to a woman who'd written him letters that stopped coming after the third battle, that he'd had a brother who'd died of fever when they were children, and he'd never quite forgiven himself for surviving, that he'd chosen this particular mountain because from the summit you could see 3 states, and something about that vast perspective made his problems feel appropriately small. The miles blurred together. 5, 7, 10. Her body had long since stopped sending pain signals. Everything hurt equally, which was the same as nothing hurting at all. Her mind played tricks, showing her the cabin just ahead when it was still miles away, showing her lights that weren't there, showing her Rowan standing and healthy, and telling her to stop, to rest, that she'd done enough. But the real Rowan, the one on the sled, kept breathing. That was all that mattered. Dawn was breaking when she finally saw the cabin for real. Not a hallucination, but actual weathered logs in the stone chimney and the barn where this had all started with spilled water and a fight about capability. She pulled Rowan into the clearing, up to the door, and somehow found the strength to help him inside. He was barely conscious, his injured leg swollen to twice its normal size, his body trembling with cold and shock. Alara built up the fire to a roar. Heated water. Cut away his boot. He screamed once, then passed out, which was a mercy. The ankle was a disaster, but nothing seemed broken. Severe sprain, torn ligaments, extensive tissue damage, bad enough that he wouldn't walk for weeks, possibly months. She cleaned the wounds with hands that shook so badly she could barely hold the cloth, applied the honey he'd taught her to use, wrapped his leg in bandages with the careful precision her mother had taught her, strong where it mattered, gentle where it needed to be. Then she collapsed beside the fire, too exhausted to even make it to her sleeping pallet. Her last conscious thought was that she'd done it. Against all logic and possibility, she'd done it. The mountain had demanded everything from her, and she'd paid the price. And Rowan was alive. She woke to find him watching her, propped against the wall, his face still gray but his eyes clear and focused. Afternoon light streamed through the windows. She'd slept for hours. "Hey," he said quietly. "Hey." Her voice was a rasp. Everything hurt. She'd never been so happy to hurt in her life. "You dragged me 12 miles. 13, actually. I got lost once. On a leg that barely works. Seems to work fine when it matters." Rowan was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he wasn't trying to hide. "I told them you were broken. The first day I saw you in that store, I thought you were someone who needed saving, someone weak. I am weak, physically, anyway. No, you're the strongest person I've ever met." He gestured to his bandaged leg, to the cabin, to everything that represented her impossible rescue. "Soldiers I fought with, men who won medals for bravery. None of them did anything like what you just did. You had every reason to stay here, stay safe. You came anyway. You would have done the same for me. Would I?" He looked uncertain. "I like to think so, but I don't know. I've spent 3 years alone on this mountain convincing myself that I don't need anyone, that strength means independence. You prove that's garbage. Real strength is showing up when it's easier not to. Real strength is doing the impossible because someone else needs you to." Alara pulled herself to sitting, her body protesting every movement. "We're quite a pair, the broken woman and the man who ran away from the world. Except neither of those things is true anymore." Rowan met her eyes. "You're not broken, and I'm not alone. Not if you don't want me to be." Something shifted in the cabin, in the space between them, in the careful boundaries they'd maintained. The employer-employee fiction fell away, replaced by something real and raw and earned through 2 months of brutal winter and 1 night of impossible rescue. "I don't want you to be alone," Alara said quietly. "Good. Because I need you, not as hired help, as—" he struggled with the words, "as someone who makes this place feel less like hiding and more like home." She smiled despite her exhaustion. "I think that's the most words you've said in a row since I met you." Trapped under a log gives you time to think. His expression turned serious. When I was lying there, certain I was going to die, all I could think about was that I'd wasted the last 3 years. Wasted time being angry at a world that never cared about my anger. And I thought about you limping into Ridgeton's store with those shirts, refusing to apologize for quality work, and I realized you'd figured out something I never did. What's that? That surviving isn't the same as living. That you can't hide from being hurt. You have to show up, even when it's terrifying, even when you know people might reject you. You have to try. He gestured weakly at his leg. I couldn't walk away from you the way they all expected me to, because something in me recognized something in you, and I'm glad I didn't walk away. I'm glad you're here. Tears were running down Alara's face now, exhaustion and relief and something deeper washing over her. I'm glad I'm here too. They sat in the warm cabin as afternoon turned to evening, two people who'd been discarded by the world finding something unexpected in isolation. Not just survival, but partnership. Not just endurance, but purpose. Outside, the mountain waited with the same cold indifference it had always shown. But inside, something had changed. The woman they'd called useless had saved the man who'd saved her. And in doing so, both had discovered that strength came in forms neither had recognized. Rowan's injury would take months to heal, which meant Alara would have to do everything. Manage the trap lines, hunt, process meat, handle every aspect of survival that had previously been his domain. The tests ahead would make everything before look easy, but as she looked at him and he looked at her, both of them battered and exhausted and alive, she knew they'd find a way. They always did. The reversal happened gradually, then all at once, the way winter turns to spring in the mountains, imperceptible changes accumulating until suddenly the world is completely transformed. For the first 3 days after the rescue, Rowan couldn't do anything but sleep and fight the infection trying to claim his damaged leg. Alara barely left his side, monitoring his fever, changing bandages, forcing water and broth down his throat when he was lucid enough to swallow. She'd drag herself outside only when absolutely necessary, to gather firewood, to check the animals, to haul water, then return to find him either unconscious or delirious, mumbling fragmented warnings about trap lines and weather patterns, and something about his brother that made no sense. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Rowan woke clear-headed to find Alara asleep in the chair beside his bed, her head tilted at an angle that would leave her neck screaming when she woke. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands were wrapped in fresh bandages where her old rope burns had reopened during the rescue. Alara. His voice was rough from disuse. She jerked awake, immediately alert. What's wrong? Are you... I'm fine. Better. He gestured weakly at the cabin around them. How long was I out? 3.5 days. Your fever spiked the second night. I thought... She stopped, swallowing hard. It was close. Rowan looked down at his bandaged leg, propped on a pile of furs. He tried to move it, and immediately regretted the attempt. Pain shot through the joint like lightning, and he gasped. Don't, Alara said firmly. The ligaments are torn, maybe bone damage too, I can't tell. You move it wrong, you could cripple yourself permanently. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The man who'd valued physical strength above all else, now facing the same limitations he'd initially judged her for. How bad is it really? He asked. Bad. You won't walk for weeks, maybe months, and when you do, you'll probably limp. She met his eyes. Welcome to my world. He expected to see satisfaction there, some vindication. Instead, he saw only concern and a strange kind of understanding. The trap lines. I'll handle them. You've never run a trap line, you don't know. Then you'll teach me. From here, you'll draw maps, explain the routes, tell me what to look for. Her voice was calm but left no room for argument. You taught me everything else. You'll teach me this too. It's dangerous, especially alone. If you get hurt, then I get hurt. Same risk you took every time you went out. Alara stood, moving to the stove to check the pot of stew simmering there. We don't have a choice, Rowan. Game won't catch itself. Spring is still 2 months away. Either I learn to do this, or we both starve. The brutal practicality of it silenced any further objections. She was right. Mountain survival didn't care about their preferences or fears. It demanded adaptation or offered death. Those were the only options. All right, he said quietly. "We start training tomorrow." "We start now." She brought him the stew and a piece of paper. "Draw me a map of the nearest trap line. Tell me what kinds of traps you use, where you place them, what signs indicate activity. I'll go out in 2 days. That gives you today and tomorrow to prepare me." Rowan stared at her, this woman who'd arrived barely able to climb stairs and was now calmly discussing venturing into winter wilderness alone. "You've changed." "So have you." She handed him a pencil. "Now teach." The education was intense and terrifying for both of them. Rowan had run his trap lines on instinct and experience, knowledge accumulated over years that he'd never had to articulate. Trying to compress all of that into words and diagrams revealed gaps in his own understanding, things he did automatically without knowing why, patterns he recognized without being able to explain them. Alara listened with fierce concentration, asking questions that forced him to think deeper. "Why do you place snares on the south side of that ridge? Why not north? How do you know when snow depth makes travel impossible versus just difficult? If a trap is disturbed but empty, what does that tell you about what approached it?" Some answers he knew, others he had to puzzle through, translating gut feeling into logic she could apply. It was humbling and frustrating and strangely intimate, this process of unmaking himself as teacher and remaking himself as someone who had to trust another person's competence. On the 6th day, Alara prepared for her first solo run. She dressed in layers exactly as he'd taught her, checked her pack 3 times, and strapped on the snowshoes with practiced efficiency. Rowan watched from his bed, the rifle he couldn't use lying beside him uselessly. "Nearest trap line only," he said for the 4th time. 3 miles out, check the snares, 3 miles back. Don't improvise, don't explore, don't take risks." "I know. If weather changes, turn back immediately. Storm fronts move fast up here." "I know. If you encounter a predator, make noise, appear large, back away slowly without running. You've told me." She turned to face him. "Rowan, I'll be careful, I promise." He wanted to tell her not to go, wanted to say they'd find another way, that he'd somehow walk on a leg that couldn't support weight, that they'd make it through on stored supplies. But lies didn't survive in the mountains. "Come back," he said simply. "Planning on it." She stepped out into the morning cold, and Rowan was left alone for the first time since the accident. The cabin felt huge and empty, every creak and settle magnified by solitude. He tried to work on repairs. There were clothes needing mending, tools needing maintenance, maps needing updating, but his attention kept drifting to the window, watching for her return. The hours crawled. Morning became afternoon. Afternoon began edging toward evening. She should have been back by now. The route wasn't complex. The weather was holding. What was taking so long? His mind conjured disasters. A fall, a predator, getting lost. Each scenario more vivid than the last, each feeding his growing panic. When she finally appeared at the tree line 3 hours after she should have, Rowan's relief was so intense it made him dizzy. She burst through the door, her face flushed from exertion and cold, dragging a sled loaded with 4 rabbits and a fox. "You're late," he said, trying to keep the anger born of fear out of his voice. "I know, I'm sorry." 2 of the snares had caught prey, but been disturbed by scavengers. "I had to reset them, and I wanted to make sure I did it right, so it took longer." She was pulling off her outer layers, explaining rapidly. "But look, 4 rabbits, that's better than you usually get from that line. You said 3 was average. And the fox, his pelt is going to be gorgeous once it's processed. You took too long, I was worried." "You're always worried. It's your default state." But her smile softened the words. "I was safe. I was careful. And I brought dinner." She'd brought more than dinner. Over the following weeks, as February's brutal cold gave way to March's slightly less brutal cold, Alara transformed from student to provider. Each trapline run grew more confident. She learned to read the subtle signs Rowan had described, the way snow patterns revealed game trails, the way certain trees indicated water sources, the way wind direction affected where animals sheltered. But more than that, she brought innovation. Rowan had run his trap lines the same way for 3 years, following established routes and patterns. Alara approached it differently. She noticed that certain areas were consistently empty and asked why they bothered checking them. She observed that some trap placements, while traditional, didn't account for the specific terrain of this mountain. She experimented with bait combinations and placement angles that Rowan had never considered. "You can't just change trap placement," he protested when she described moving 3 snares to different positions. "Those locations are proven to sometimes work, but the game trail has shifted. I saw the tracks. Animals are moving 50 yards east of where they used to, so I moved the traps to where the animals actually are, not where they used to be. That's not how it's done. That's not how you did it, but I'm not you." She was processing the rabbit with efficient precision now, her knife work steady and sure. "Your way worked when you were checking traps daily. I can only get out every 3 days because of everything else that needs doing. So I'm optimizing for my limitations, not yours." And it worked. Her catch rates were actually higher than his had been, a fact that both amazed and slightly wounded his pride. But the trap lines were only part of the reversal. With Rowan immobile, every aspect of cabin survival fell to Alara. She managed the firewood supply, hauled water, maintained the animals, processed meat, cured hides, and handled the 1,000 small tasks that kept them alive. Tasks Rowan had done automatically became problems she had to solve from first principles. The root cellar organization was her triumph. Rowan had kept supplies organized by type, all preserved vegetables together, all smoked meats together, all dried goods together. Functional, but inefficient. Alara reorganized everything by meal planning. She created a system where daily rations were pre-assembled, where ingredients that worked together were stored together, where she could grab what she needed for a complete meal without searching through multiple areas. She labeled everything in her neat handwriting, created inventory lists, and implemented a rotation system that ensured nothing spoiled from being forgotten in the back. "This is excessive," Rowan said when she showed him her organizational charts. "This is efficient. Your way wasted time. Time is warmth. Warmth is survival." She pointed to her carefully drawn diagrams. "This system cuts my root cellar time in half. That's 15 minutes a day I'm not exposed to cold. Over a week, that's almost 2 hours of preserved body heat." He couldn't argue with the math or with the results. Their food management became so efficient that they actually discovered they had more supplies than they'd thought. Rowan had simply been bad at inventory tracking. The real test came when Rowan developed a secondary infection in his leg. It happened in late February, during a week when temperatures plunged to 30 below, and going outside meant risking frostbite in minutes. Alara noticed the smell first, something wrong beneath the bandages, something that made her stomach clench with fear. She unwrapped his leg to find the wounds red and weeping, tissue that had been healing now inflamed and angry. "That's bad," Rowan said, his voice tight. "I know. That's amputation bad if it spreads." "I know." Alara was already moving, pulling down the medical supplies, her mind racing through everything Rowan had taught her about infection. "Honey's not working anymore. We need something stronger." "There isn't anything stronger, not up here." "Then I'll make something." She was searching through the herb stores, finding yarrow, golden seal, garlic. "You said these have antiseptic properties." "I'm going to make a poultice." "That's not proven." "Neither is giving up." She was crushing herbs with fierce determination, mixing them with rendered fat to create a paste. "You told me mountain survival is about trying things, about adapting when the first solution fails. So I'm adapting." She applied the poultice to his wounds with gentle hands, then wrapped everything in clean bandages. The herbs stank, sharp, and bitter. But she'd seen her mother use similar remedies in the settlements. Folk medicine wasn't science, but sometimes it was all you had. For 3 days, she changed the poultice every 4 hours, monitoring the infection with obsessive attention. Rowan's fever spiked again, and she sat beside him through the long nights, cooling his forehead with snowmelt water, talking to him even when he couldn't respond. "You don't get to die," she told his unconscious form on the 3rd night. "I didn't drag you 12 miles through a blizzard so you could give up now. I didn't learn everything you taught me so I could bury you in spring. You're going to survive this because I'm not strong enough to run this mountain alone, and you're too stubborn to leave me with that burden." On the 4th day, the inflammation began to recede. By the 5th day, the wounds were clearly healing again, new tissue forming healthy and pink instead of angry red. Rowan woke on the 6th day to find Alara slumped in her chair asleep from exhaustion. When his movement woke her, she checked his leg with trembling hands, then burst into tears. "It worked," she sobbed. "Your leg is healing. The infection is clearing. It worked." "You did it," he said softly. "You saved me. Again." "I had to. You're mine to save." The possessiveness in her voice surprised them both. The dynamic in the cabin had shifted so completely that it took them both weeks to fully recognize it. Rowan, who'd spent 3 years in total control of his environment, now depended on Alara for everything. She brought him food, helped him to the chamber pot, bathed him when he couldn't manage it himself, medicated his wounds, and made every decision about daily survival. At first, he chafed against it, hated the helplessness, hated needing assistance, hated watching her do his work while he sat useless. "I should be the one checking traps," he said one morning as she prepared to head out. "You can't walk." "I should be processing those hides." "Your hands shake from fever still. You'd ruin them." "I should be doing something." Alara stopped, turning to face him fully. "You are doing something. You're healing. That's your job right now. Mine is everything else. When your job is done and you can walk again, we'll redistribute. Until then, stop trying to do my job and let me do it." The firmness in her voice, the absolute authority, was new. This wasn't the uncertain woman who'd arrived in autumn, apologizing for existing. This was someone who'd found her competence and wouldn't apologize for it. "I'm not good at being helpless," Rowan admitted quietly. "I know. I spent 2 years being helpless in Ridgeton. It's humiliating and infuriating, and it makes you feel like you're worth nothing." She knelt beside his bed, her eyes gentle. "But I learned something there that you're learning now. Being temporarily unable to do everything doesn't make you useless. You have value beyond your physical capability. You're teaching me through your experience. You're planning routes and strategies I can't see yet. You're the reason I know how to survive out there. But you're the one actually surviving. Because you showed me how." She squeezed his hand. "We're partners, Rowan. Sometimes one partner carries more weight. Right now, it's me. Later, maybe it'll be you again. That's what partnership means." The concept was foreign to him. He'd spent his entire adult life believing that needing help meant failure, that independence was the only valid form of strength. Watching Alara function without him forced a recalculation of everything he thought he knew. She wasn't just surviving, she was excelling. The hides she processed were superior to his. Her careful attention to detail, her patience with the scraping and treating process, resulted in furs that were softer and more valuable. Her meat preservation was more precise, with less waste and better flavor. Her cabin organization made their daily operations smoother and more efficient. And the changes she'd made to his trapline system? In the last 2 weeks of February, her catches exceeded his best month ever. "I don't understand it," Rowan said one evening as she showed him her latest haul. "I've been running these mountains for 3 years. You've been here 4 months. How are you better at this than me?" Alara considered the question seriously. "I'm not better. I'm different. You learn through trial and error, figuring things out alone. That works, but it means you sometimes repeated mistakes without knowing better options existed. I learned through your teaching, which let me skip some of the trial and error. Plus, I had to find my own way because your way didn't fit my limitations. That forced innovation you never needed. So my teaching made you better than the teacher. Your teaching gave me foundation. I built on it. That's not better or worse. It's just how learning works." She started processing the rabbits with practiced efficiency. "Besides, I have advantages you don't." "Like what?" "Patience, attention to small details, willingness to spend time on precision rather than speed. Different problem-solving approaches. None of those make me superior, just different." Rowan watched her work, seeing the intelligence in every movement, the careful consideration of each choice. She wasn't trying to copy him anymore. She'd found her own style, her own methods, and they were legitimately effective. "I judged you," he said suddenly. "That first day, in the store, when I saw your leg, I judged you. Thought you couldn't possibly be as capable as someone without a disability. I was wrong." "Yes, you were." No anger in her voice, just statement of fact. "I'm sorry." "I know. You've been showing me you're sorry every day since, through teaching, through trusting me, through letting me fail and succeed on my own terms." She glanced at him. "Apologies are words. You've been giving me action." The conversation settled something between them. an acknowledgement of how far they'd both traveled from those early days of misunderstanding and incorrect assumptions. As March progressed and Rowan's leg slowly healed, he began contributing again in the ways he could. He couldn't walk, but he could work with his hands. He repaired gear Alara brought back damaged from trapline runs. He crafted new tools and improved existing ones. He took over all the fine detail work, sharpening knives, mending clothes, preparing ammunition, tasks that required precision but not mobility. And he began teaching her things he'd never taught anyone: how to read weather patterns 3 days out, how to navigate by stars when clouds obscured landmarks, how to identify threats before they became dangerous. Advanced survival knowledge he'd accumulated through years of solitary learning. Alara absorbed it all, adding it to her growing expertise. But she also taught him organization systems, efficiency improvements, social skills he'd let atrophy in isolation. She made him talk through his decision-making process, which forced him to recognize patterns in his own thinking he'd never articulated. In teaching her, he learned about himself. Their evenings developed a rhythm. After dinner, they'd sit by the fire, Rowan in his chair with his leg elevated, Alara working on whatever project needed attention, and they'd talk. Not about survival or work, but about everything else. Their pasts, their fears, their dreams that had seemed dead and were slowly, tentatively coming back to life. "What did you want to be?" Alara asked one night. "Before the war, before the mountain, what was the dream?" Rowan was quiet for a long time. "Carpenter, builder. I wanted to construct things that lasted, that people could use and pass down. Houses, furniture, things with permanence." He gestured at the cabin. "Built this place myself. It's not fancy, but it's solid. It'll stand for 50 years. It's beautiful, in its own way. What about you?" "Seamstress shop in a real town. Not a frontier settlement, somewhere established, where people cared about quality clothing. I wanted to create dresses for special occasions, suits for important events, things that made people feel transformed when they wore them." She smiled sadly. Then the accident happened, and that dream died. Hard to run a shop when you can't stand long enough to do fittings. Could still do it differently. Custom work, by commission. People send you measurements, you create pieces, ship them out. Who'd trust a cripple to make their wedding dress? Someone who saw your work first. Rowan's voice was firm. "Your stitching is the best I've seen. Better than anything in Ridgeton, probably better than most places in the territories. That skill doesn't care about your leg." Alara looked at him, something shifting in her expression. "You really believe that?" "I've learned not to say things I don't mean. Mountain burned that out of me." He met her eyes. "You're exceptional, Alara. Not despite your limitations. Just exceptional. The sooner you believe that, the sooner you can decide what you actually want instead of what you think you're allowed to want." The words hung in the warm cabin air, settling into places in Alara's heart that had been cold for years. By mid-March, Rowan could stand with support. By late March, he could walk short distances using a crutch Alara had fashioned from a sturdy branch and padding. His leg would never be what it was. The limp would be permanent, the strength diminished. But he was mobile. The first time he made it outside unassisted, he stood in the clearing, breathing cold air and staring at the world he'd been separated from for nearly 2 months. "Everything looks different," he said when Alara joined him. "Because you're seeing it from a different perspective, literally." He glanced at her, understanding the layers in that observation. His injury had forced him to experience the world the way she always had, from a position of physical limitation that required adaptation and creativity. It had been humbling and educational and necessary. "I couldn't have survived without you," he said. "I know. That doesn't scare you. Why would it? We need each other. That's not weakness, it's reality. You survived alone for 3 years, but you're healthier with help. I survived in Ridgeton alone, but I'm stronger here with partnership." She gestured at the mountain around them. "Nothing up here survives truly alone. Trees need their roots connected underground, sharing nutrients. Animals hunt in packs or pairs. Even the mountain itself needs the forest and the snow and the streams. Independence is an illusion. Interdependence is truth." Rowan absorbed that, testing it against everything he'd believed about strength and self-sufficiency. She was right. His solitary survival had been possible, but diminished. With Alara, the cabin had become something more. Not just shelter, but home. Not just survival, but life. When spring comes, he said carefully, we'll need to go down to Ridgeton, trade the furs, get supplies for next year. I know. They'll see us differently, you especially. You're not the broken woman they threw away anymore. Elara smiled, and there was steel in it. No, I'm not. And it's going to be very satisfying showing them exactly how wrong they were. You want revenge? I want recognition. I want them to understand that their judgment was worthless, that their cruelty was a reflection of them, not me. She turned to face him fully. But mostly, I want them to see that we're not asking for acceptance. We're just showing them what partnership looks like when it's built on respect instead of utility. Rowan felt something in his chest warm, something he hadn't experienced in years. Not quite love, not yet, but the recognition that love might be possible, that the walls he'd built around himself were coming down brick by brick, and that was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Together then, he said, we go down together. Together, she agreed. They stood in the clearing as the sun climbed higher, two people who'd been broken by the world in different ways, who'd found each other through a combination of cruelty and chance, who'd survived a winter that should have killed them both. The mountain rose around them, vast and indifferent and beautiful. But inside the cabin behind them, warmth waited, food waited, partnership waited. They'd transformed survival into something more. And spring was coming, bringing with it the opportunity to show the world that had discarded them both exactly what they'd built from the pieces. Spring announced itself not with warmth but with sound. The crack and groan of ice surrendering to thaw, the rush of snowmelt forming streams where none had existed, the return of birds whose songs had been absent for months. The transformation happened almost overnight, as if the mountain had simply decided winter was finished and moved on without ceremony. Rowan stood at the cabin window watching water drip from the eaves, his weight distributed between his good leg and the crutch that had become extension rather than tool. His injured leg ached with the changing pressure, a permanent reminder of how close he'd come to not seeing this spring at all. Behind him, Elara was conducting inventory with the same meticulous attention she brought to everything. The winter supplies were laid out on the work table, preserved foods they hadn't needed, equipment that had survived the season, and most importantly, the furs. Dozens of pelts processed to perfection, representing months of work and the difference between poverty and prosperity. We have more than I expected, she said, running her hand over a fox pelt that gleamed like copper in the morning light. Your catches from fall plus mine from winter. This is easily twice what you took down last spring. Your processing made the difference. These are premium quality. Brennan would kill for inventory like this. Brennan's not getting them. Elara's voice carried an edge that made Rowan turn. We're not trading with him. We're not giving him the satisfaction of profiting from work he called worthless. Then who? There's a trader who comes through Ridgeton in spring. Independent operator, Dutch told me about him last year. Van Morrison. He pays fair prices and doesn't ask questions. She met Rowan's eyes. We trade with him, we get our supplies, and we leave. We don't owe that town anything. Rowan studied her, seeing the changes winter had wrought. She stood straighter now, her weight balanced between both legs with less favor to the good one. The constant physical work had built muscle despite her injury, and more than that, it had built confidence that showed in every gesture. You're not afraid of going back, he observed. No, I'm not. She folded the fox pelt carefully. I was afraid when I left. Afraid they were right about me. Afraid I'd fail. Afraid I'd prove that broken was all I'd ever be. But I survived the winter. I saved your life. I ran trap lines I'd never seen before and brought in better catches than you did. I'm not afraid of their judgment anymore because I know exactly what I'm worth. And what's that? She smiled, and it was fierce. More than they could see. More than I could see. Enough. They spent the next week preparing for the descent. The journey down would be harder than the journey up had been. They had more to carry, Rowan was less mobile, and spring runoff made trails unpredictable, but they had something they hadn't had before, complete trust in each other's competence. Elara planned the route with strategic precision, identifying rest points and contingency options. Rowan organized their trade goods, separating what they'd sell from what they'd keep, calculating values and negotiating strategies. They worked in synchronized efficiency, a partnership refined by months of depending on each other for survival. On the morning they left, Rowan stood in the cabin doorway, taking one last look at the space that had been prison and sanctuary and home. You're coming back, Alara said, reading his expression. We're coming back, he corrected. Both of us. This is home now. For both of us. Is it? Or is this still your mountain and I'm just visiting? The question caught him off guard. He turned to face her fully, seeing the vulnerability beneath her newfound strength. She'd proven herself, had earned her place here, but some part of her still waited for rejection. This stopped being my mountain the moment you dragged me out of that shelter, Rowan said quietly. It became ours. The cabin, the trap lines, the whole damn mountain, ours. If you want it. I want it. No hesitation. I want the isolation and the challenge and the honest work. I want a place where my value is measured by what I do, not what people think I can't do. I want... She stopped, swallowed. I want to build a life here, with you, if that's what you want too. The words hung between them, more significant than any marriage proposal, more binding than any contract. This was choosing partnership in its purest form, two people deciding to face an unforgiving world together because together they were stronger than the sum of their parts. Yes, Rowan said simply. That's what I want too. They sealed it not with a kiss, but with a handshake, firm and businesslike and absolutely sincere. Romance could come later, if it came at all. What mattered now was the commitment, partners in survival, in work, in the building of something that would last. The descent took 2 days. Rowan's legs slowed them, and they had to navigate around several washed-out sections of trail, but they maintained steady progress. At night, they camped in a hollow that provided shelter from wind, and Alara handled all the setup while Rowan directed from his position against a tree. I'm useless at this, he muttered, frustrated at his immobility. You're navigating. You're making strategic decisions about shelter placement and fire safety. You're doing exactly what you can do. She didn't coddle him, just stated facts. Being injured doesn't make you useless. It makes you temporarily limited. There's a difference. You didn't used to be this brutally practical. I learned from the best. She was grinning now. You spent months telling me exactly how things were without sugarcoating anything. Now you get the same treatment. He couldn't argue with that logic. They reached Ridgeton's outskirts on the afternoon of the second day. The town looked smaller than Rowan remembered, more fragile, as if winter had diminished it while the mountain had grown stronger. Or maybe his perspective had changed. When you survived something genuinely harsh, everything else seemed manageable by comparison. They entered from the east, leading their pack animals down the main street. It was early enough that most people were working, but those who were out stopped to stare. Rowan and Alara walking side by side. Him with his crutch and permanent limp. Her with her twisted leg and confident stride, both scarred and weathered and undeniably alive. Someone ran ahead, and by the time they reached the town square, a crowd had gathered. The same faces that had mocked them 6 months ago now watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to disbelief to something that might have been shame. Jack Mortimer pushed through the crowd, his face red. Hail! We thought, hell, we heard you might be dead. No smoke from the cabin for weeks, no sign of activity. We figured the winter took you. Winter tried, Rowan said levelly. Didn't succeed. Mortimer's eyes shifted to Alara, and something flickered in his expression, recognition that she wasn't the same broken woman they'd offered up like a joke. Miss Voss, you survived too. That's good. Mrs. Hale, actually, Alara's voice was calm, matter-of-fact. The lie came easily, strategic rather than emotional. In frontier territory, being married offered protections that being partners didn't. And yes, we both survived. Quite well, in fact. The crowd murmured. Rowan didn't correct her, understanding immediately what she was doing. They'd discuss it later, make it legal or not, depending on what served them best. Right now, the fiction established boundaries these people would respect. We're looking for Van Morrison, Rowan said, addressing the crowd rather than Mortimer specifically. The independent trader. Anyone know where he's set up? North End by the old mill. Tom Farley's wheezing voice emerged from the crowd. He's buying furs, paying good prices. Been here 3 days already. Thank you. Rowan started to move, then paused, turning back to Mortimer. That offer you made last fall, the supplies, the wedding present, we'll decline. Don't need charity, or your approval. He walked on, Alara beside him, leaving Mortimer sputtering behind them. The crowd parted and Rowan caught fragments of whispered conversation. different. Both limping now, survived a full winter alone up there. Look at those furs. Van Morrison was exactly what Rowan had hoped for. A weathered man in his 50s who evaluated goods based on quality rather than who sold them. He examined their furs with expert hands, checking the processing, the softness, the absence of damage. "This is exceptional work," he said, looking up at them. "Best furs I've seen this season. Where'd you process them?" "Mountain cabin, 15 miles north." Alara spoke with authority. "I handled most of the processing. Traditional techniques with some modifications for efficiency." Morrison's eyebrows rose. "You did this work? Is that a problem?" "Opposite of a problem. This is premium quality. I can move these to the eastern markets for significant profit, which means I can pay you significant prices." He pulled out a ledger and began calculating. "Standard rate for fox is $3 per pelt. For these, I'll pay $5. Rabbits are usually 50 cents. I'll give you $1. The deer hides, those are works of art. $8 each." Rowan did the math in his head, and his breath caught. Morrison was offering them nearly $300, more money than he'd made in his previous 2 years combined. Alara's expression didn't change. "That's fair. We'll take it." They negotiated for supplies next: flour, salt, coffee, ammunition, tools they needed to replace. Morrison matched them item for item, throwing in extras when Alara demonstrated her knowledge of fair market value. By the time they finished, they'd secured enough supplies for the next year and still had money left over. Real security, not just survival. "You folks planning to work that mountain long term?" Morrison asked as they finalized the trade. "Permanently," Rowan said. "Then I'll make you an offer. I come through Ridgeton twice a year, spring and fall. You bring me furs of this quality, I'll guarantee premium prices, no negotiation. I'll also put you in touch with buyers who will commission custom work." He looked at Alara. "That's stitching on your coat. That's not standard. That's art. There are people in the eastern cities who'd pay significant money for custom leatherwork of that quality." Alara blinked. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. Frontier craftsmanship is selling well back east. Rich folks want authentic mountain goods, especially if they're functional and beautiful. You could build a whole secondary income stream." He handed her a business card. Actual printed cardstock, rare in frontier territory. "Think about it. Send me samples when you're ready." They left Morrison's tent in a daze. $300. Guaranteed trade relationship. Possibility of custom commissions. In one afternoon, they'd transformed their survival into genuine prosperity. "We need to celebrate," Alara said. "Actual celebration. Not just surviving, succeeding." "What did you have in mind?" "Dinner. At the saloon. Public. We sit down, we eat real food we didn't have to catch and cook ourselves, and we let this whole town see exactly what we built." It was a bold move, deliberate and calculated. Walking into the saloon was walking into the place where their arrangement had begun, where Mortimer had tried to humiliate them both. Returning there successful was a statement. They entered as the evening crowd was gathering. Conversations died as heads turned. Rowan and Alara walked to a table, not the corner where he used to hide, but the center of the room, and sat down. The bartender approached nervously. "Hail, ma'am. What can I get you?" "Steak," Rowan said. "Biggest you have. Potatoes, vegetables, whatever's fresh. And whiskey. The good stuff, not the rot gut." "Same for me," Alara added. "An apple pie for dessert. I haven't had pie in 8 months." The bartender hurried off. Around them, the saloon slowly came back to life, but the attention remained. They were the spectacle, and everyone knew it. Mortimer entered 10 minutes later, Dutch Hansen and Peter Cobb flanking him. He saw Rowan and Alara immediately, and his face hardened. He approached their table with the swagger of a man used to dominating his environment. "Heard you made quite a sale," Mortimer said, his tone suggesting he'd heard exact numbers. "Van Morrison doesn't usually pay that kind of money." "He pays for quality," Alara said calmly. "We delivered quality. Must have been a lucky winter." "Wasn't luck. Was work." She met his eyes steadily. 6 months ago, you called me useless. Called me a burden. Offered me to Rowan like I was commodity. Like I was garbage you wanted removed." The saloon had gone completely silent now, everyone listening. I was just trying to help, Mortimer started. You were being cruel. You were entertaining yourself at my expense, at both our expenses. But here's what you didn't understand then, and probably don't understand now. Your cruelty was the best thing that ever happened to me. Mortimer blinked, clearly confused. You forced me out of Ridgeton. You made it impossible to stay. And in doing so, you pushed me toward the only person in 50 miles who was willing to judge me on my capability rather than my limitations. She gestured to Rowan. He taught me to survive. I taught him that survival isn't the same as living. Together, we built something you'll never understand, partnership based on mutual respect rather than social obligation. That's a nice speech, Mortimer said, his voice tightening. But you're still a cripple, both of you now. You survived one winter. Let's see if you survive the next. We will. Rowan's voice was quiet but carried absolute certainty. We'll survive next winter, and the one after that, and the one after that. We'll thrive while you sit here in your town convincing yourself that your small cruelties make you strong. And every spring we'll come down with furs better than the year before, and you'll remember that the two people you threw away built something worth more than your approval ever was. He stood, leaning on his crutch, and faced Mortimer directly. You tried to humiliate us. Instead, you freed us. So thank you, genuinely. Thank you for being exactly cruel enough to push us toward each other and exactly stupid enough to think that made you powerful. Mortimer's face was purple now, veins bulging. You think you're better than us? You're just two cripples hiding on a mountain. We're two people who learned that strength comes in forms your limited perspective can't recognize. Alara stood as well, her bad legs steady beneath her. You measure worth by physical perfection. We measure it by competence, resilience, and the willingness to adapt when circumstances change. By those metrics, we're not just better than you, we're in a completely different category. The bartender arrived with their food, breaking the tension. Mortimer stood there for another moment, clearly wanting to continue the confrontation, but aware that he'd lost. Everyone in the saloon had heard the exchange, had seen him challenged and unable to respond effectively. He turned and walked out, Hanson and Cobb following like dogs trailing their master. The saloon erupted in murmurs. Rowan and Alara sat back down and began eating their steak, glorious, rich, perfectly cooked steak that tasted like civilization and victory. That felt good, Alara said quietly. Better than it should have, Rowan admitted. But yeah, that felt good. They finished their meal in peace. Several townspeople approached tentatively to offer congratulations or ask questions about mountain life. Some seemed genuinely interested, others were clearly fishing for gossip, but Rowan and Alara answered with polite reserve. They weren't here to make friends or explain themselves. They were here to establish that they existed on their own terms. As they left the saloon, Marcus Brennan stepped in front of them. Rowan tensed, but Alara put a hand on his arm. Mr. Brennan, she said coolly. Brennan looked uncomfortable, his merchant's face struggling with something that might have been guilt. Miss Voss, Mrs. Hale, I mean. My wife wanted me to tell you. He stopped, started again. Those shirts you mended last fall. They were perfect. Sarah's been using them all winter, and the stitching hasn't failed once. She wanted you to know. Thank you, Alara said, her tone not warming. If she wants more work done, she can contact me through Van Morrison. I take commissions now. Fair prices for quality work. She'd like that. I'd like that. Brennan shifted his weight. I was unfair to you, in the store. I shouldn't have. You didn't deserve that treatment. No, I didn't. Alara didn't make it easy for him. But your unfairness taught me something valuable. It taught me that some people will always judge based on appearance rather than ability, and those people's opinions are worthless. So thank you for the lesson, even if the delivery was cruel. She walked past him, Rowan beside her. Behind them, Brennan stood in the street, looking like a man who'd realized something important far too late to matter. They collected their supplies from Morrison, loaded everything onto their animals, and prepared to leave. The sun was setting, painting the peaks in shades of gold and orange. Somewhere up there, their cabin waited. Empty, but not abandoned, theirs, but not exclusively, a foundation for whatever they chose to build next. Ready? Rowan asked. More than ready. Alara adjusted her pack. Let's go home. They walked out of Ridgeton as the last light faded, two figures moving against the darkening landscape. Behind them, the town returned to its evening routine, already beginning to transform what had happened into story and legend. The mountain trapper and the woman they'd called useless, who'd survived together when everyone expected them to fail. The climb back took 3 days. They moved more slowly with their heavy supply load, but there was no urgency now. Winter was past, spring was here, and they had months to prepare for the next season. On the final approach to the cabin, Elara stopped, looking at the structure with new eyes. "We need to expand, add a proper workshop, maybe a second room for storage. If I'm going to take custom commissions, I need dedicated space." "We can do that. I'm good with construction, and you're good with organization. Together we'll design something functional." Rowan studied the cabin thoughtfully. "Maybe add a covered porch, somewhere to work in decent weather without being fully outside. And we need to improve the trapline system. Your routes are good, but we can optimize them now that we know the mountain better. Maybe add some permanent shelters at strategic points for emergencies." They were already planning, already building on what they'd established. The winter had been survival. The next season would be consolidation. The season after that, genuine prosperity. Inside the cabin, everything was as they'd left it, clean, organized, waiting. Elara built up the fire while Rowan started unpacking supplies. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from months of synchronized effort. As night fell and the fire blazed to life, they sat together at the work table with paper and pencils, sketching expansion plans and debating approaches. Their conversation was technical, practical, filled with measurements and calculations. But beneath it ran warmth, connection, the solid foundation of partnership that had been forged in crisis and tested by adversity. "I have a question," Rowan said eventually. "The Mrs. Hale thing. Did you want that to be real, or was it just strategic?" Elara considered carefully. "It was strategic in the moment, but I wouldn't object to making it real, if you wanted. We're already partners in every way that matters. Making it legal just adds protection and simplifies social dynamics." Very romantic. "I'm not offering romance. I'm offering partnership with legal recognition." But her eyes were warm. "Romance, if it comes, can develop on its own timeline. Right now, I'm more interested in building a life with someone I trust completely. Everything else is negotiable." Rowan thought about that. Thought about how she'd saved his life twice, how she'd transformed his solitary existence into genuine partnership, how she'd proven herself stronger than he'd ever been despite the physical limitations he'd initially judged her for. "All right," he said. "Next spring, when we go down for trade, we'll make it legal. Find a circuit judge or minister or whoever handles that out here. We'll do it properly. Deal." She extended her hand and they shook on it. Another business agreement sealed with the same straightforward sincerity that marked everything between them. Outside, the mountain settled into night. Wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere distant, an owl called to its mate. The same sounds that had surrounded Rowan for 3 years of solitude, but they felt different now. Less lonely, less like exile and more like choice. The weeks that followed fell into new rhythms. Rowan's leg healed enough for limited mobility, and they worked together on the cabin expansion. Elara handled the detail work, precise measurements, careful fitting, while Rowan provided the muscle for heavy lifting. They developed a system of complementary skills, each doing what they did best, neither trying to do everything. The workshop addition took shape slowly but surely. Elara designed it to maximize natural light for her close work, with storage organized by project type rather than material type. She began working on sample pieces for Morrison's Eastern contacts, custom leather bags with her distinctive stitching patterns, reinforced saddlebags that were both functional and beautiful, garment repairs that became art. Rowan rebuilt the trapline system with her input, creating more efficient routes and adding those emergency shelters they'd discussed. They tested new preservation techniques she'd theorized during winter, experimented with different bait strategies, documented everything for future reference. Their evenings became a time for planning and discussion, but also for the small moments that build lives. Elara teaching Rowan to read patterns in fabric the way he'd taught her to read patterns in snow, both of them laughing at their mutual incompetence in each other's specialized skills. The relationship deepened not through grand gestures, but through accumulated small kindnesses and shared challenges overcome. One evening in late May, as they sat on their new covered porch watching sunset paint the peaks, Ilara said quietly, "I've been thinking about that seamstress shop dream, the one I thought died with my leg." And? It didn't die. It just transformed. I can't run a traditional shop, but I don't need to. Morrison's contacts want custom work. I have time between seasons to create pieces. You handle the physical aspects I can't manage. We're building something different but potentially more successful than a traditional shop ever could be. Custom mountain crafts work has a ring to it. Hale Mountain Goods. She tested the name. Premium furs, custom leather work, frontier craftsmanship. We could build a real reputation. Maybe eventually hire people, expand operations. Not immediately, but in a few years once we're established. Rowan absorbed that vision, the future she was sketching, the ambition that went beyond mere survival. You're talking about building a business, a real one. Why not? We have the skills, we have the location, we have the work ethic. The only thing we lacked was capital, and Morrison gave us that. Now we choose, coast on what we've built or push further. Pushing further means more risk. Everything worth doing involves risk. You taught me that. She looked at him. But we decide together. This is partnership. I'm not making unilateral decisions about our future. Rowan thought about the man he'd been when he climbed this mountain 3 years ago. Angry, isolated, convinced that independence was the only form of strength worth pursuing. That man would have rejected any plan that involved expanded connection with the world below. But he wasn't that man anymore. Ilara had changed him, had shown him that strength could look like cooperation, that vulnerability could lead to growth, that the things he'd been running from were less terrifying than the loneliness he'd been running toward. "Let's build it," he said, carefully, sustainably, on our terms. But yes, let's build something bigger than just survival. They shook hands on it, another business agreement, another step forward. But this time, when their hands clasped, they held on longer than necessary. When they finally released, Ilara's fingers trailed across his palm with deliberate slowness. The romance they'd set aside as negotiable was beginning to negotiate itself into existence. Summer arrived in full glory, the mountain transforming from harsh survival landscape into something almost gentle. They worked their traplines light, only enough to maintain skills and supplement food. Most of their energy went into building the business foundation Morrison had suggested. Ilara created sample pieces that showcased her range, from functional workwear to decorative art pieces. Each item featured her signature stitching pattern, a distinctive interlocking technique that was both beautiful and incredibly strong. She documented her process, created pricing structures, developed a system for managing commissions. Rowan handled logistics, supply management, inventory tracking, communication with Morrison's contacts through written correspondence carried by traveling merchants. He was better at writing than speaking, his letters clear and concise, building business relationships through competence rather than charm. The first commission arrived in July. A wealthy industrialist from the Eastern Territories wanted custom hunting bags for an expedition he was planning. 3 bags, specific dimensions, waterproof and durable, budget of $50. Ilara worked on them for 3 weeks, putting every skill she possessed into the creation. When she finished, the bags were masterpieces, functional art that would outlast their owner. She packed them carefully and sent them east with Morrison's next supply run. The response came 6 weeks later. Absolute delight. The industrialist paid double the agreed price and requested her card to pass to his associates. He also sent a photograph of himself using the bags on his expedition, validation that her work succeeded in the real world, not just in controlled conditions. "We're building something real," Ilara said, staring at the payment and the photograph. "This is actually working." "Did you doubt it would?" "A little. I spent so long being told I couldn't that part of me still expects failure." She looked at him. "But we keep not failing. We keep succeeding. And it's starting to feel permanent rather than lucky." Autumn arrived with its usual warning signs: birds migrating, squirrels gathering frantically, the quality of light changing in ways that told experienced mountain residents winter was positioning itself for return. But this year felt different. They weren't scrambling to prepare. They were ready months in advance, their systems tested and proven, their partnership solid. The winter that followed was harsh but manageable. They'd learned the mountain's rhythms, understood its dangers, knew their own capabilities and limitations. Rowan's leg held up better than expected, and Alara's confidence had transformed her efficiency. They were no longer fighting for survival. They were executing a well-planned strategy that allowed survival to happen almost automatically. On a night in deep January during a storm that howled outside with familiar fury, they sat by the fire working on their respective projects. Rowan was sketching expansion plans for the barn. Alara was finishing a custom commission. The silence between them was comfortable, broken only by the crackle of flames and the scratch of pencil on paper. "I love you," Rowan said suddenly, not looking up from his sketching. Alara's hand stilled on her work. After a moment, "I know, I've known for months. You didn't say anything. I was waiting for you to figure it out yourself. You're not good with emotions. You needed time." She set down her stitching and looked at him. "I love you too. Have since you walked into that shelter dying and still tried to send me away to save myself. Maybe before that. This is a terrible romantic moment. It's perfect for us." She moved to sit beside him and he put his arm around her shoulders, awkward at first, then settling naturally. "We're not grand gestures and passionate declarations. We're practical decisions and accumulated small moments. This is exactly the romantic moment we'd have. When spring comes, we'll make it legal like we planned. And then what? Then we keep building, keep growing, keep proving that the people who thought we were broken were measuring the wrong things." He kissed the top of her head, surprising himself with the tenderness of it. "We make this mountain ours. We create something that lasts. We live." "Yes," Alara said simply. "We live." The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, warmth and partnership and love transformed survival into something richer. Two people who'd been discarded by a world that couldn't see their value had found each other and built something that world would never understand but could never take away. When spring finally arrived and they descended to Ridgeton for trade and to make their partnership legal, they walked into town not as people seeking acceptance, but as people who'd already found everything that mattered. Van Morrison had spread word about their work, and they arrived to find 3 new commission requests and interest from multiple buyers. The ceremony was brief and practical, conducted by a circuit judge who asked no questions beyond the legal requirements. Alara Voss became Alara Hale in a transaction that took 5 minutes, but represented something built over 18 months of shared adversity and triumph. They celebrated with the same steak dinner tradition they'd established the previous spring, sitting in the center of the saloon while Ridgeton watched and whispered and slowly came to understand that these two had transcended the town's judgment entirely. Mortimer didn't approach them this time, neither did Brennan. The men who'd tried to humiliate them had learned that some people can't be diminished by mockery. They can only be freed to become more than anyone expected. The years that followed brought expansion and success. Hale Mountain Goods became known throughout the territories for quality and craftsmanship. They hired 3 workers, carefully chosen people who'd been overlooked by society for various reasons, and who proved, like Alara, that being underestimated was often an advantage. The cabin grew into a compound. The workshop expanded. The trap lines became so efficient they were studied by other mountain workers. Commissions poured in from across the country, and the business thrived not despite their limitations, but because they'd learned to transform limitations into innovations that created superior results. Rowan never fully recovered from his injury. The limp remained, and he had days when the pain was significant. But he discovered that physical limitation didn't diminish his worth. It just changed how he contributed. He became the strategist, the planner, the person who saw the big picture while Alara handled intricate details. Alara's leg never healed either. She would always walk with difficulty, would always face challenges that others navigated easily. But she stopped apologizing for it, stopped trying to hide it, and started treating it as simply a characteristic rather than a defining limitation. They built a life that honored who they were rather than who the world thought they should be. And in doing so, they proved something the people of Ridgeton had never understood. Strength isn't about meeting someone else's standard. It's about defining your own and having the courage to live by it. On their 5th anniversary, they stood on the ridge above their compound watching the sun set over peaks that had once seemed impossibly hostile and now felt like home. Below them, smoke rose from chimneys, their cabin, their workshop, the small houses their workers occupied. A community built on respect and competence rather than pity or obligation. Do you ever regret it? Alara asked. Leaving civilization, choosing this harder path? Rowan thought about it seriously, the way he thought about everything. I regret the years I wasted hiding instead of living. But coming here? Meeting you? Building this? He gestured at the compound below. No regrets. Not one. Even when it's brutal? Even when winter comes and everything is hard? Especially then, because we face it together. Because we've proven we can survive anything if we refuse to break. He took her hand. The mountain tried to kill us both. Multiple times. It failed. We're stronger than mountains. Alara laughed, the sound carrying across the ridge. That might be the most romantic thing you've ever said. I'm working on it. Give me another 5 years. I might manage an actual poem. Don't. I like you practical. She squeezed his hand. We're not a fairy tale. We're better. We're real. They stood there as the light faded and the first stars appeared, two people who'd transformed rejection into opportunity and survival into thriving. The mountain rose around them, vast and beautiful and indifferent, and they faced it not with fear but with confidence born from experience. In Ridgeton, people still told their story, though the details changed with each telling, becoming legend rather than fact. Some said the mountain woman could call storms and speak to animals. Others claimed the scarred trapper had single-handedly fought off bears and bandits. None of the embellishments were true. The truth was simpler and more profound. Two people society had deemed broken had refused to accept that judgment. They'd found each other, had learned from each other, and had built something that proved worth was measured not by perfection but by persistence, not by meeting standards but by creating new ones. And when they returned to their cabin that night, climbing down from the ridge as darkness settled, they did so not as people who'd overcome adversity, but as people who'd been shaped by it into something stronger, wiser, and infinitely more capable than either had been alone. The door closed behind them. The fire blazed to life. And in the warm cabin on the cold mountain, two people who'd survived being discarded by the world sat down to dinner together, secure in the knowledge that they'd created something no one could take away. A partnership built on respect, a business built on excellence, and a life built on the simple truth that being called broken doesn't make it so. The mountain waited outside, patient and eternal. But inside, warmth and love and stubborn determination had carved out a space that would last long after the snows melted and the seasons turned. They'd proven that strength came in countless forms, that value couldn't be measured by other people's standards, and that the greatest triumph wasn't avoiding limitation, but transcending it through partnership and refusal to quit. And in the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.